to the nameless wanderers of the soul, the ones who carry the dust of forgotten selves in their fur, who are drawn by the phantom echoes of laughter across desolate landscapes. May you find your circle of stones, your bowl of pristine water, and the gentle breeze that carries the scent of sagebrush and ancient earth, whispering not of what was lost, but of what is yet to become. This story is for those who, like the coyote in these pages, bravely traverse the vast, indifferent terrains of existence, compelled by an anomaly in the night, a resonance of being that calls them toward their own unveiling, their own becoming, under the vast, watching sky. For every soul that has ever felt the profound isolation of the dry hills, and yet, in that stillness, found the courage to listen for a voice on the horizon, for the sound of a name waiting to be spoken. May your journey be one of recognition and release, and may you always answer the silence. The land stretched out, a boundless expanse of ochre and bone, bleached by a sun that seemed to have forgotten how to offer solace. It was a landscape sculpted by wind and time, where every ridge and ravine whispered of ages past, yet offered no clue to the present. Against this indifferent canvas, a figure moved. He was a creature of the wild, a coyote, but one adrift from his kind, a solitary silhouette against the immense, indifferent sweep of the sky. His fur, once perhaps a vibrant tapestry of natural hues, was now dulled, dusted with the fine, pervasive grit that coated every surface in this arid realm. The dust was more than mere soil. It was the particulate residue of a forgotten existence, a tangible manifestation of memories long since crumbled to nothingness. It settled into the very fibers of his being, a constant, silent reminder of what was lost, or perhaps never truly was. His days were a perpetual journey across endless roads, paths etched by the passage of countless unidentifiable creatures, each a fleeting moment in the vast silence. The nights were no different, marked only by the cold, distant pronouncements of the stars, celestial bodies that wheeled through the inky blackness with an impassive, unblinking gaze. There was no pack to share the hunt, no communal warmth against the chill of the desert night, no shared understanding of the world. He was an island, a singularity of being in a landscape that acknowledged no such distinctions. The silence of the hills was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all but the most essential sounds. The only rupture in this profound quiet was the rhythmic, percussive punctuation of his own paws on the parched earth, a dry, brittle crunch that echoed his deep-seated isolation. Each step was a testament to his aloneness, a solitary beat in the vast, unfeeling heart of the wilderness. He moved with a primal, unstudied grace, a liquid flow of muscle and bone that spoke of an ancient lineage. Yet, this grace was not one of belonging, but of instinct. He was driven by a force he did not comprehend, an imperative that pulled him forward, a phantom limb of a former self, a spectral guide through this desolate, yet undeniably beautiful world. There was a purpose in his wanderings. He felt it in the subtle tension of his muscles, in the keen alertness of his senses, but its origin and its destination remained shrouded in the same impenetrable mystery as the land itself. He was a question mark etched against the horizon, a living embodiment of the void, yet possessed of an undeniable visceral presence. The dry hills, in their stark, unforgiving beauty, seemed to mirror the emptiness within him, a perfect, desolate reflection of a lost soul. The landscape was a tapestry woven from the threads of drought and time, canyons carved by eons of wind and infrequent, violent rain, snaked through the hills like ancient scars. The earth, cracked and fissured, drank greedily of the scant moisture, leaving behind a parched, thirsty testament to its enduring struggle. Skeletal remains of long dead scrub, twisted and bleached, offered a sparse, spiky punctuation to the otherwise unbroken sweep of dry grasses and hardy, resilient bushes. The air itself was thin and sharp, carrying the faint, dry scent of sagebrush and dust, a perfume of desolation that clung to everything, including the coyote. His fur, though designed for this climate, was perpetually laden with this fine powder, a testament to the relentless embrace of his surroundings. He was, in every sense, a creature of the dust, born of it, sustained by it, and ultimately becoming of it. He would traverse these hills for days, the sun a relentless hammer forging the earth, the moon a cold, distant lantern casting long, distorted shadows. There was no memory of a den, no scent of kin, no lingering echo of a call from a pack. His existence was a perpetual present, a continuous unfolding of one moment into the next, devoid of the anchors of past experience or the anticipations of a shared future. His senses, however, were acutely tuned to the subtlest shifts in his environment, the faintest rustle of a lizard in the dry grass, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, the subtle tremor of the earth beneath his paws, all registered with an intensity that bespoke a constant vigilance. This heightened awareness was not born of joy or curiosity, but of a deep, instinctual need to survive in a world that offered little in the way of comfort or assistance. His journey was not a random meandering, though it might appear so to an outside observer. There was a flow to his movements, a subtle directionality that seemed to emanate from some internal compass, a magnetic pull towards an unknown destination. He would follow the contours of the land, his paws finding purchase on scree slopes and loose gravel with an innate surety. He understood the language of the wind, the way it sculpted the sand dunes, the way it carried scents from miles away, and he navigated by its whispers. The indifference of the landscape was palpable, yet he was a part of it, an intrinsic element in its stark tableau. He was a wanderer, not by choice, but by nature, a solitary soul woven into the very fabric of this arid, silent world. The endless roads, the indifferent stars, the pervasive dust, They were not merely external elements, they were reflections of his own inner state, a desolate landscape mirrored in the emptiness of his forgotten self. As he moved through the silent canyons and across the wind-scoured plains, a subtle shift began to occur in the collective consciousness of the unseen inhabitants of these dry hills. They were the rustlers in the undergrowth, the flitting shadows at the edge of the vision, the ancient presences that inhabited the very stones and earth. These beings, attuned to the subtle energies that pulsed through the landscape, began to weave tales, fragments of lore gleaned from the wind and the whispers of the land, coalescing around the enigmatic presence of the nameless coyote. His solitary journey, his profound isolation, his very existence against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the hills had become a subject of hushed speculation. Some spoke of a deliberate shedding, a conscious unburdening of identity. They whispered of a creature who, for reasons unknown, had chosen to cast off the weight of name and kin, to embrace a state of pure, unadulterated being, unencumbered by the past. This narrative suggested a willfulness, a deliberate act of self effacement that resonated with the primal forces of the land, a return to a state of nature unadorned. The coyote, in this telling, was a philosopher of the wild, a seeker of a purer existence, who had voluntarily severed all ties to a former self. This interpretation painted him as an ascetic, a renouncer of the social bonds that defined other creatures, seeking a solitary enlightenment in the heart of the wilderness. Others, however, leaned towards a more mystical explanation. They spoke of bargains struck in the deepest, most shadowed canyons, of pacts made with forces that lay hidden beneath the earth or beyond the veil of mortal perception. These whispers suggested that his erasure of self, his profound emptiness, was not a choice but a price paid, a precious prize, perhaps a life, a love, or a memory of immense value, had been traded for the oblivion that now cloaked him. This tale imbued him with an aura of tragic destiny, a figure marked by an ancient transaction, forever bound to the consequences of a forgotten deal. The dust that clung to him was not merely the detritus of the earth, but the ashes of a past life, a visible reminder of a profound, irreversible sacrifice. These speculative narratives, like the dry wind that whistled through the ancient, sun-baked rock formations, offered no solace, no concrete answers. They were like the shifting sands of the desert, constantly reforming, never settling into a definitive shape. Each whisper, each imagined past, only served to deepen the mystery of his lost identity, to add more layers to the enigma that he represented. The void where his name and his history should have been seemed to expand with each passing tale, a testament to the unanswerable questions that hung in the air around him. The unseen inhabitants of the hills, themselves creatures of shadow and suggestion, projected their own interpretations onto the solitary figure, creating a mythology of their own around his silent passage. He was the blank page upon which they scribbled their fears, their desires, and their ancient lore, a canvas for the unspoken narratives of the land itself. The fragmented whispers carried on the dry air were like seeds sown in fertile imagination, each one germinating into a new and equally uncertain possibility. The monotonous rhythm of the coyote's existence, a predictable cycle of hunger, thirst, and restless wandering, was suddenly, jarringly fractured. It began not with a sight nor a scent, but with a sound, a seismic shift that jolted him from his perpetual state of passive endurance. It was a sound that resonated not in the outer world, but deep within his own being, a visceral, undeniable vibration that shook him to his very core. It was his own voice, not the customary bark or yip, the instinctive vocalizations of his kind, but something entirely alien, yet intimately, disturbingly familiar. It was a resonant, unbidden laughter that spilled forth into the vast, indifferent night, an explosion of sound that seemed to carry within it the echo of a forgotten joy, or perhaps a sorrow so profound it had manifested as mirth. The sound, alien, yet undeniably his own, was an anomaly in the overwhelming darkness, a beacon in the oppressive silence. It reverberated through the canyon walls, bouncing off the ancient rock formations, a disembodied symphony of self discovery. The laughter wasn't a conscious act, it was an involuntary eruption, a primal outpouring that bypassed thought and reason, stemming from some buried wellspring of consciousness. It was a sound that spoke of a past he couldn't grasp, a present he couldn't define, and a future he couldn't predict. Yet, in its strangeness, it ignited something within him, a spark of primal curiosity, a flicker of recognition that pierced through the layers of amnesia. It was the sound of a self he had forgotten, a self that was now inexplicably reasserting its presence. He stood frozen, his ears swiveling, straining to comprehend this impossible phenomenon. The laughter had ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind a ringing silence that was now more profound, more pregnant with meaning than before. The echo lingered in his mind, a phantom sensation that stirred a nascent awareness. What was this sound? Where had it come from? And more importantly, why had it come from him? The questions, unbidden and insistent, began to swirl in the quiet corners of his being. This was not the mindless existence he had known. This was a moment of profound, disorienting clarity. The very earth seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the significance of this unexpected eruption of sound from the heart of the silent hills. The laughter, an anomaly in the vast quietude, had acted as a catalyst, a disruptive force that fractured the monotonous continuum of his existence. It was a sound that had no place in the landscape of his current reality, yet it emanated from his very being. It was a voice unbidden, a melody unlearned, a song of a forgotten self that had somehow found its way to the surface. The plains, the canyons, the indifferent stars, all seemed to hold their breath, witnessing this inexplicable event. The coyote, the nameless wanderer, felt a tremor pass through him, a sensation akin to waking from a long, deep slumber, only to find that the world he had known had been irrevocably altered by the simple act of making a sound. His ears, perpetually attuned to the external world, now turned their acute sensitivity inward, grappling with this internal echo, compelled by an inexplicable force, a sensation that felt eerily akin to remembering a dream just as it slipped through one's grasp. The coyote began to follow the auditory thread. The laughter, though it had ceased, had left an imprint, an invisible trail etched onto the fabric of the night. His pause, guided by an instinct deeper than conscious thought, a primal urge that bypassed reason, led him across the rugged, unforgiving terrain. The dry earth, baked hard by the sun, yielded to his determined pace, each step a silent affirmation of his quest. The faint echo, a whisper on the wind, served as a magnetic pull, an almost physical tether drawing him towards a specific yet unknown destination. He navigated by this ethereal guide, his senses honed to an exquisite degree. The subtle variations in the terrain, the faint scents carried on the night air, the very texture of the ground beneath his paws, all were interpreted through the lens of this compelling auditory phenomenon. It was as if the memory of the sound had imprinted itself upon his very being, directing his movements with an unerring precision. He skirted treacherous ravines, scaled steep inclines, and moved through dense thickets of thorny scrub, all with a singular focus. The cold, distant stars seemed to offer a silent witness to his pursuit, their ancient light illuminating the path ahead, a path defined not by sight, but by sound. The laughter, or rather the memory of its resonance, acted as a compass, pointing him towards a source that lay hidden within the vast expanse of the dry hills. It was a destination that held the answer to the profound anomaly he had experienced, the origin of the sound that had shattered his solitary world. He moved with a quiet urgency, a primal drive that propelled him forward through the darkness. The journey was arduous, the landscape unforgiving, yet the call of the unknown, the promise of understanding, urged him onward. He was no longer merely a wanderer, he was a seeker, drawn by the echo of his own forgotten voice, a voice that had momentarily broken through the silence and ignited a dormant flame within his being. The pursuit was not just physical, it was a journey into the depths of his own lost self, a quest to reclaim a fragment of a past that had been buried beneath the dust of oblivion. He arrived at the site as the first hint of pre-dawn light began to soften the edges of the world. It was a place marked by the remnants of a recent presence, a testament to an extinguished campfire, a perfect circle of stones, worn smooth by time and use, delineated where warmth and life had once thrived. These stones, arranged with deliberate intention, spoke of a conscious effort, a ritualistic gathering. At the very heart of this circle, a single, pristine feather lay beside a bowl of water, the feather stark white against the ochre earth, seemed impossibly clean, untouched by the ubiquitous dust that coated every other surface. Similarly, the water in the bowl was clear and still, a mirror reflecting the nascent light of the sky, miraculously undisturbed by the encroaching grit. The simplicity and deliberate placement of these items evoked a sense of profound ritual, a meticulously arranged tableau that spoke of an expectant presence, of a game played out in the silent theater of the night. It suggested a waiting, a preparation for an arrival, or perhaps a culmination. The feather, delicate yet resilient, seemed to possess an almost tangible aura, a silent witness to the events that had transpired here. Its presence, alongside the bowl of water, felt significant, charged with an unspoken meaning. The water, clear and undisturbed, offered a perfect reflection, a portal into the stillness of the night, a calm surface in the vast, wild expanse. He settled at the edge of the stone circle, drawn by an unseen force, a magnetism emanating from the very air around the fire pit. His instincts, honed by years of survival, told him this was a place of significance, a locus of something beyond the ordinary. The silence here was different from the silence of the hills. It was a charged quietude, a prelude to revelation. He lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the feather and the water, the two silent sentinels of this desolate place. A profound sense of anticipation settled over him, a feeling that he had reached the end of a journey and the beginning of something far more profound. The night, which had been his solitary companion, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting with him, the echo of his own laughter, still resonating within his mind, seemed to lead him here, to this quiet circle, to this moment of silent contemplation. The dry hills, which had always seemed so vast and empty, now felt like a stage set for a revelation, and he, the solitary actor, was poised for his cue. The whispers began subtly, like the rustling of dry leaves in a wind that had yet to fully awaken. They were the hushed murmurings of those who dwelled in the shadowed crevices and sun-baked hollows, the creatures whose lives were woven into the very fabric of the desolate landscape. They spoke of the solitary coyote, a creature now as much a part of the ancient earth as the stones themselves. But his passage through their silent dominion had stirred something primordial within their collective consciousness. His profound isolation, the stark emptiness that seemed to emanate from him, was not merely a state of being, but a canvas upon which they projected their own deepest, most ancient fears and interpretations. One thread of these spectral conversations spoke of a deliberate unburdening, a conscious shedding of self. This narrative painted the coyote not as a victim of circumstance, but as a deliberate renouncer, an ascetic of the wild who had chosen to divorce himself from the cumbersome weight of name and kin. The logic was simple, yet profound. To truly embrace the elemental existence of the desert, one had to cast aside the societal trappings, the bonds that tethered one to a history that was no longer relevant. In this telling, the coyote was a philosopher, a seeker of a purer, unadorned state of being who had voluntarily severed all ties to a former life. His silent wanderings were not aimless, but a meditative pilgrimage, a return to a primal state of nature stripped bare of all artifice. The dust that clung to his fur was not a sign of neglect, but the humble mantle of his chosen spiritual discipline, a physical manifestation of his detachment from the material world. He was a symbol of intentional oblivion, a testament to the power of will in the face of an overwhelming past. This interpretation resonated with those who saw the land itself as a force of purification, capable of burning away the dross of memory and identity, leaving behind only the raw essence of existence. Yet, another current of speculation flowed through the hushed exchanges, a darker, more cautionary tale. This narrative delved into the realm of the arcane, whispering of bargains struck in the deepest, most shadowed canyons, of pacts made with forces that lay hidden beneath the earth or beyond the veil of mortal perception. In this version, the coyote's erasure of self, his profound emptiness, was not a choice, but a price paid, a precious prize, something of immeasurable value, perhaps a life, a love, or a memory so potent it had defined his very being, had been traded for the oblivion that now cloaked him. This interpretation imbued him with an aura of tragic destiny, a figure marked by an ancient transaction, forever bound to the consequences of a forgotten deal. The dust that coated him was not merely the detritus of the earth, but the very ashes of a past life, a visible, ever present reminder of a profound, irreversible sacrifice. His silence was not that of peace, but of a soul weighed down by an eternal debt. The subtle tension in his movements, the keen alertness that betrayed no outward emotion, were not signs of a serene detachment, but of a constant internal vigil, a perpetual awareness of the unseen price he continued to pay. The unseen inhabitants of the hills, themselves creatures of shadow and suggestion, projected their own fears of loss and consequence onto the solitary figure, weaving a mythology of their own around his silent passage. He became the blank page upon which they scribbled their deepest anxieties, their most fervent desires for release from the burdens of memory and obligation. These speculative narratives, like the dry wind that whistled through the ancient, sun-baked rock formations, offered no solace, no concrete answers. They were like the shifting sands of the desert, constantly reforming, never settling into a definitive shape. Each whisper, each imagined past, only served to deepen the mystery of his lost identity, to add more layers to the enigma that he represented. The void where his name and his history should have been seemed to expand with each passing tale, a testament to the unanswerable questions that hung in the air around him. The fragmented whispers were like seeds sown in fertile imagination, each one germinating into a new and equally uncertain possibility. They were the echoes of a forgotten world, filtered through the consciousness of those who remained, each interpretation a testament to the enduring power of narrative in the face of the unknown. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as if bearing witness to the ceaseless, speculative dance that swirled around the silent, dust-laden form of the nameless coyote, each story adding another spectral hue to the already complex tapestry of his unknowable existence. The desert, in its vastness and indifference, became a mirror, reflecting back the fragmented thoughts and fragmented histories of those who observed him, transforming his solitary journey into a grand, unfolding legend. The more they spoke, the less they understood, and the deeper the mystery became, a testament to the profound and unsettling beauty of the unexplainable. The desert night, a velvet cloak embroidered with the pinpricks of distant stars, had always been a symphony of subtle sounds for the solitary coyote, the sifting of sand, the whisper of wind through brittle scrub, the distant cry of a night bird. These were the familiar cadences of his existence, the lullaby of his self-imposed exile. He moved through this world of hushed whispers and fleeting shadows, a creature of instinct and solitude, his days and nights a seamless, undifferentiated flow. The landscape itself was his companion, its vast indifference a comfort, its ancient silence a solace that had, over time, smoothed away the sharper edges of memory, or so it seemed. He had cultivated an existence so pared down, so elemental, that the very concept of a sound originating from within himself, beyond the involuntary responses of survival, had faded into the realm of the forgotten. Then it happened, a tremor, not of the earth beneath his paws, but of something far more profound, rippled through his being. It began as a tickle, a strange vibration deep within his chest, a sensation utterly alien and yet disturbingly resonant. It was as if a long dormant spring had been coiled and then suddenly, inexplicably, released. His ears, perpetually alert to the external world, twitched with an unfamiliar internal stimulus. He paused mid-stride, his lean body tensing. The usual predatory focus, the keen awareness of prey or threat, was momentarily eclipsed by this burgeoning internal event. What was this strange pressure building behind his ribs? What was this alien warmth spreading through his throat? And then it erupted. Not a howl of distress, not a yelp of pain, but a sound that defied classification, a sound that seemed to tear through the carefully constructed edifice of his silence. It was laughter, unbidden, unrestrained, a cascade of pure, unadulterated mirth that burst from him like a geyser, echoing and re-echoing off the sheer canyon walls. The sound was utterly foreign, a wild, guttural eruption that startled even him. It was a sound born of no outward stimulus, no perceived joke, no shared camaraderie. It was a spontaneous explosion of something deeply buried, a forgotten response to a forgotten stimulus, dredged up from the deepest, most inaccessible recesses of his being. The sound was not gentle, it was a raw, visceral outpouring, a torrent of noise, that seemed to carry the weight of centuries within its cadence, and was a sound that spoke of release, of a joy so profound or a sorrow so acute that it could only manifest as this wild, untamed vocalization. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of a spring bursting forth after eons of dormancy. The coyote stood frozen, his body trembling with the aftershocks of this seismic event, his senses reeling from the sheer, overwhelming intensity of his own voice unleashed. The sound filled the canyon, a startling intrusion into the immemorial quietude, a beacon of unexpected life in the vast, starlit emptiness. It bounced from rock to rock, each reverberation a testament to the sheer power of this unleashed utterance. He felt it in his bones, in the vibrating air around him, a tangible manifestation of a profound internal shift. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to disappear into the shadows, to bury this aberrant noise. But something held him rooted to the spot. Curiosity, a primal, unbidden urge, warred with his ingrained need for anonymity and silence. What was this sound? Where had it come from? It was as if a hidden chamber within him had been unexpectedly illuminated, revealing a forgotten architecture of emotion. The laughter, once it began, seemed to possess a life of its own, morphing, shifting in tone, moving from a high-pitched cackle to a deep, rumbling chuckle, before finally subsiding into a series of breathless, gasping sounds. Each variation was a revelation, a facet of this strange new expression. He had lived his life in a world where silence was paramount, where his presence was defined by his ability to move unseen and unheard. His identity, if such a thing could be said to exist, was etched not in sound, but in the subtle signs he left behind. A disturbed pebble, a faint scent on the wind, the ephemeral imprint of a paw in the dust. Now, this cacophony, this undeniable proof of his existence, had shattered that carefully constructed reality. He was no longer merely the echo in the dust, the shadow in the canyon. He was the source of a sound that reverberated through the very stones of the earth. He cocked his head, his large ears swiveling, trying to decipher the meaning of the receding echoes. Were they a mockery, a warning, or simply the natural consequence of an act that had, for reasons unknown, become inevitable? The silence that followed was not the comforting, familiar silence of before. It was a charged silence, pregnant with the memory of his own voice, a silence that now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his next move. The laughter, though it had faded, had left an indelible mark. It was a seed planted in the fertile soil of his mind, a seed that promised to sprout questions, to demand answers, to unravel the threads of his present existence by pulling at the forgotten ones. He lowered his head, sniffing the air as if to catch the spectral scent of his own recent vocalization. The familiar aromas of dust, creosote, and dry earth were still there, but they were now overlaid with a new, intangible scent, the scent of his own astonished sentience. He circled slowly, his gaze sweeping across the moonlit landscape, searching for a disturbance, a sign that his outburst had been witness, that its implications had been understood, but there was only the indifferent sweep of the wind and the impassive gaze of the stars. The desert had absorbed his cry, swallowed it whole, yet the echo remained, resonating not in the canyons, but within the newly awakened caverns of his own consciousness. This was not merely a sound, it was a revelation. It was proof that within the carefully constructed void of his existence, something still stirred, something still remembered how to sing or weep or laugh. The very act of vocalization, so alien to his current self, had undeniably linked him to a past he could not recall, a past where such expressions were not only possible, but perhaps even commonplace. The laughter had been a key, turning in a lock he hadn't known existed, opening a door to a room filled with forgotten sensations. He felt a flicker of something akin to fear, a primal apprehension of the unknown that lay within him. But alongside it, a more powerful emotion began to stir, an insatiable, burning curiosity. What else lay dormant? What other forgotten capacities waited for the right, improbable moment to resurface? The night, which had always been a symbol of his quiet, unobtrusive existence, had now become a stage, and he, the solitary actor, had just delivered his first unexpected line. The performance, it seemed, was far from over. The silence was broken, and in its place, a question had been born, echoing louder than any laughter. The silence that followed his own startling eruption was not the peaceful quiet of the desert night he had always known. It was a silence charged with an unknown, a void that now echoed with the memory of his own voice. He stood, a statue carved from shadow and starlight, his ears still straining, not for the external sounds of the night, but for the faint, lingering resonance of his own laughter. It was as if a chord had been struck within him, a vibration that had momentarily silenced the universe, and now, as it faded, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. A strange sensation began to manifest, not as a thought, but as an impulse, a deep, undeniable pull. It was like trying to recall a dream upon waking, the hazy outlines of something profoundly significant, just out of reach, yet undeniably there. The laughter, that raw, untamed outpouring, had not simply been an isolated event. It had been a signal, a beacon that had pierced through the carefully constructed edifice of his solitude, and now it beckoned him forward. His paws, usually so deliberate and precise in their movement across the unforgiving terrain, seemed to carry an uncanny urgency. They responded to a call that bypassed his conscious mind, a primal recognition of a sound that, though alien, felt intimately connected to him. He turned, not in a panicked flight, but with a focused intent, his lean body a silhouette against the starlit sand. The direction was not chosen, but felt, a subtle shift in the air, a whisper that was more than wind, seemed to guide him. The dry earth, cracked and parched from countless seasons, offered little resistance to his determined tread. Each step was a measured movement, a rhythmic beat against the vast, silent canvas of the desert floor. The cold light of the stars, his only companions for so long, now seemed to cast a different kind of illumination, not just on the landscape, but on an inner journey he had not realized he had begun. The laughter, though no longer a physical sound, continued to resonate within him, a faint but persistent hum that drew him onward. It was the auditory ghost of an event, a phantom melody that promised a source, a reason, a beginning to this bewildering new chapter of his existence. He moved through the scrub, the brittle branches snapping softly beneath his paws, a counterpoint to the silent symphony of his internal quest. The familiar scent of creosote, usually a comforting anchor in the darkness, now seemed infused with a subtle anticipation. He was not hunting, not fleeing, but following a thread woven from pure sound, a thread that had emerged from the deepest, most forgotten part of himself, and was now leading him into the unknown. The terrain began to shift, the gentle slopes giving way to more rugged contours. He navigated narrow canyons, his senses heightened, not for the rustle of prey, but for any hint of that elusive sound. It was a delicate dance, a tracking of an echo that was both within and without. Sometimes he would pause, tilting his head, convinced he could hear it again, a faint, almost imperceptible ripple on the edge of hearing. Then it would elude him, only to resurface moments later, a tantalizing reminder of his purpose. This journey was not one of miles covered, but of layers peeled back. Each step was a movement away from the solitary, silent existence he had known, and a step towards an understanding that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The laughter, that wild eruption, had been a door flung open. Now he was walking through the threshold, his eyes, accustomed to the darkness, slowly adjusting to a new and unexpected light. The desert, which had always been his sanctuary of silence, was now becoming the stage for a revelation, and the sound that had broken its immemorial quietude was his reluctant guide. He reached a ridge, the land dropping away sharply before him. Below, a small, shallow ravine snaked through the earth, its contours softened by the moonlight. It was here, he felt, the pull was strongest. The air itself seemed to hum with a latent energy, a subtle thrum that mirrored the vibration still present in his own chest. He descended carefully, his paws finding purchase on loose scree and weathered rock. The faint scent of something ancient, something deeply rooted in the earth, began to mingle with the scent of his own bewildered presence. He continued to follow the ravine, his gaze sweeping the moon-drenched stones, the sparse vegetation clinging precariously to the canyon walls. It was as if the very landscape was whispering secrets, pointing him towards a specific spot. The laughter, or rather the memory of it, was no longer a faint whisper, but a more insistent presence, a subtle resonance that seemed to emanate from the very heart of this desolate place. He felt a growing sense of recognition, not of a place, for he had never been here before, but of a feeling, a resonance that stirred something long dormant within his own being. As he rounded a bend, the ravine widened slightly, revealing a small alcove carved into the rock face. It was not a cave, not a den, but a natural recess, worn smooth by centuries of wind and water. And there, bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon, was a sight that stopped him in his tracks. It was not a creature, not a source of danger, but something far more perplexing. Scattered on the dusty floor of the alcove were smooth gray stones, each one bearing faint, almost imperceptible markings. And from the very air around these stones, he felt it, the residual echo of the laughter. It was as if the stones themselves had absorbed the sound, holding it captive within their ancient forms. He approached slowly, his initial apprehension giving way to an intense, almost magnetic curiosity. He sniffed the air, and for the first time since his outburst, he detected a scent that was not of the desert, not of himself, but of something else entirely. It was a dry, earthy scent, tinged with an indefinable sweetness, like dried wildflowers or ancient dust that had known the sun for millennia. He lowered his head, his keen nose hovering over the stones. The markings, he realized, were not random. They were symbols, abstract and flowing, reminiscent of the patterns the wind etched into the sand, but with a deliberate, intentional quality. He nudged one of the stones with his nose. It was cool to the touch, its surface worn smooth by time, and as his snout brushed against it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through his skull. It was the echo, amplified, resonating within him, and with it came a fleeting, almost hallucinatory image, a flash of sunlight glinting off something bright, a feeling of warmth spreading through his chest, and then the sound, the laughter. He recoiled slightly, his ears flattening against his head. This was not the solitary existence he had cultivated. This was something that hinted at connection, at shared experience, at a past that was not entirely his own, yet undeniably felt. The stones were not merely stones, they were artifacts, vessels of memory, and the laughter that had erupted from him, that inexplicable outpouring, was not a random anomaly, but a response to something hidden, something waiting to be rediscovered. He looked around the alcove, his eyes scanning the surrounding rock face. Were there more of these stones? Was this a place where others like him, or perhaps even different beings, had once gathered? The silence of the desert, which had always been his sanctuary, now felt like a shroud, concealing a truth he was only just beginning to glimpse. The trail of laughter had led him not just to a physical location, but to the precipice of a forgotten history, a history that was now beginning to whisper its secrets to him through the silent language of ancient stones. The feeling of recognition deepened, an unsettling but potent awareness that the desert was not merely a backdrop to his life, but a repository of experiences, of sounds, of emotions that transcended the boundaries of his solitary existence. He had followed the echo, and in doing so, had found himself at the mouth of a well of memory, its depths still shrouded in mystery. but its waters calling to him with an irresistible ancestral pull. The path ahead was no longer simply a continuation of his journey, but an invitation to delve into the very foundations of his being, to unearth the forgotten resonance that had so unexpectedly burst forth as laughter. The ravine opened into a small, shallow basin, a natural amphitheater carved by the patient hand of time. The moonlight, filtering through a gap in the canyon walls, painted the scene in ethereal shades of silver and gray. Here, the air felt different, charged with a palpable stillness that was not emptiness, but an absence filled with expectation. He had been drawn here by the echoes of his own laughter, a sound that had shattered his solitude and set him on this bewildering path. Now, standing at the edge of this secluded space, he felt a profound sense of arrival. Before him lay the remnants of a recent gathering, stark in their simplicity, yet imbued with an undeniable significance. A perfect circle of stones, smoothed by countless seasons, marked the circumference of where a fire had once blazed. These were not the rough, scattered rocks of the desert floor. They were deliberately placed, each one resting with a quiet authority, forming a boundary that spoke of containment, of a sacred space. The absence of the fire's warmth was not a sign of abandonment, but of a transition, a pause in a ritual that had clearly just concluded. The charcoal dust was faint, a ghost of embers, yet the circle remained, a testament to the life that had briefly animated this desolate spot. At the very heart of this stone ring, a sight arrested his attention. Resting on the dry, dusty earth was a single feather, impossibly pristine. It was a delicate plume, its barbs unmarred, its color a soft, muted hue that seemed to absorb and reflect the moonlight. It lay beside a shallow, roughly fashioned bowl, also crafted from stone, and within it, water. Miraculously, the water was clear, undisturbed by the fine, pervasive dust that coated every other surface in the desert. It shimmered, a tiny, self contained oasis, a liquid jewel in the stark landscape. The feather and the bowl of water were not casually placed. Their arrangement was too precise, too intentional. They were offerings, symbols, pieces of a silent language that he was only beginning to decipher. A quiet understanding, deeper than thought, settled upon him. This was not a chance encounter, not a random discovery. The stones, the feather, the water, they were a deliberate tableau, laid out with a purpose that resonated with the very impulse that had drawn him here. It was a message, a greeting, or perhaps a test. He felt an unseen force, a gentle but insistent pull, urging him to settle, to become part of this quiet scene. His instincts, honed by years of solitary existence, recognized the stillness as an invitation, not a threat. The silence here was not the crushing weight of his usual isolation, but a pregnant pause, a moment of communion. He lowered himself to the ground, his movements fluid and economical. He did not tread carelessly within the circle of stones. Instead, He chose a spot just outside its boundary where the moonlight cast long shadows. His body, accustomed to the harsh embrace of the desert, seemed to mold itself to the earth, finding a natural repose. His senses, however, remained acutely alert, processing the subtle nuances of the scene. The faint scent of creosote and dry earth was now mingled with something else, a faint, almost imperceptible fragrance that seemed to emanate from the feather and the water, a scent like dried herbs and something clean like rain on parched stone. He observed the feather closely. It was not from any bird he recognized. Its shaft was slender, its veins soft and downy, a testament to a gentle creature or a carefully chosen artifact. Its very existence here, so perfectly preserved, was a minor miracle in itself. He wondered if it held a story, a lineage, a whisper of the being from which it came. The bowl of water was even more enigmatic. How could it remain so pure in this arid environment? He leaned closer, his sensitive nose taking in the subtle aroma, detecting no trace of salt or decay. It was as if the water itself possessed a resilience, a protective aura. The circle of stones, he mused, was a demarcation, a boundary drawn against the chaos of the desert. It defined a space of order, of intention. He traced the line of the stones with his gaze, imagining the hands, or perhaps paws, that had placed them with such care. Were they waiting for him? Had his laughter been a signal, a confirmation that he was ready to find this place, to understand this arrangement? The air seemed to vibrate with a latent energy, a silent hum that spoke of a presence, even in the absence of any visible form. He felt a deep sense of connection to this place, a feeling that transcended mere observation. It was as if the very stones resonated with a shared memory, a collective experience that he was now tapping into. His own laughter, that unexpected eruption from his solitary existence, had not been a random act. It had been a catalyst, a key that had unlocked a hidden door. And now, standing before this carefully arranged scene, he felt the first stirrings of understanding, the initial unfolding of a truth that had been buried beneath the dust of ages. The desire to interact with the feather and the water was strong, a primal urge to touch, to taste, to connect. But a deeper instinct, a wisdom learned from the silence, held him back. There was a protocol here, a reverence that needed to be observed. This was not his place to disrupt, but a place to be received into. He remained still, his senses open, his mind a calm pool reflecting the moonlit scene. He was a guest in a sanctuary he had stumbled upon, a visitor at a threshold he had not known existed. The night was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of unseen creatures in the scrub, the distant cry of a nocturnal bird, the soft whisper of the wind caressing the canyon walls. Yet, all these sounds seemed to recede, to fade into the background, leaving only the profound stillness of the circle and its offerings. He felt a growing sense of wonder, a quiet awe at the deliberate beauty and the profound mystery presented to him. This was more than just a campsite. It was a shrine, a place of deliberate power. He extended a paw, not to disturb, but to feel the energy radiating from the circle. The stones were cool beneath his pads, their surfaces worn smooth, as if by the touch of countless hands. He could almost feel the residual warmth of the fire that had once burned here, a memory imprinted on the very earth. He closed his eyes, allowing the subtle vibrations to flow through him, seeking to understand the intent behind this silent display. The silence was not empty, it was full of potential. It was the silence before a revelation, the hush before a profound truth is spoken. His laughter had been the first crack in the dam of his solitude, and this circle of stones, the feather, and the water were the first signs of the flood that was to come. He settled deeper into the earth, a silent observer at the heart of a ritual he did not yet comprehend, but to which he felt an undeniable kinship. The desert, his lifelong companion in solitude, had now revealed itself to be a keeper of secrets, a stage for ancient rites, and he, it seemed, was about to become a participant in a story far older than himself. The carefully arranged elements spoke of patience, of waiting, and of a profound understanding of the rhythms of existence. He was not just following an echo, he was walking into its source, and the desert, in its infinite wisdom, had prepared a welcome for him. The pristine feather and the untouched water were not just objects, they were symbols of purity, of renewal, and of a profound connection that transcended the physical realm, hinting at a spiritual landscape that was as vast and mysterious as the star-strewn sky above. He felt a sense of profound belonging, a recognition of a truth that had always been present but hidden from his solitary eyes. He was not alone in this desert. He had never truly been alone. The gentle breeze, carrying the scent of sagebrush and ancient earth, began to stir. It caressed the coyote's fur, a subtle awakening of dormant senses. This was not a mere atmospheric change. It felt like a communication, a soft whisper from the very soul of the landscape. The breeze seemed to carry with it the weight of time, hinting at secrets held within the dry hills and the indifferent sky above, a prelude to the coming revelation. It was a tangible presence, a breath drawn by the land itself, and it brushed against him with a familiarity that was both comforting and profoundly unsettling. It felt like an acknowledgement, a sign that the stillness he had entered was not a void, but a space alive with unseen currents. As the breeze wove its way through the basin, it stirred the fine dust surrounding the circle of stones, creating ephemeral veils that danced in the moonlight. It swirled around the feather, lifting its delicate barbs almost imperceptibly, then settled them back into their pristine alignment. The water in the stone bowl remained unrippled, an anomaly that deepened the sense of the unnatural, or perhaps the supernaturally natural. The air, once heavy with an expectant silence, now hummed with a new energy, a subtle resonance that vibrated through the earth and up into his very bones. He felt a shift, a turning of a cosmic dial, moving him from a state of passive observation to one of active reception. This breath of the land felt like an ancient language, spoken not in words, but in sensations, in the scent of the dry herbs that clung to the canyon walls, in the faint rustle of a seed head disturbed by the passing air. It whispered of endurance, of the cycles of life and death that had played out in this very spot for millennia. It spoke of resilience, of how life, in its myriad forms, found a way to persist even in the harshest of environments, clinging to existence with tenacious roots and hidden springs. He closed his eyes, allowing the breeze to wash over him, to cleanse away the layers of his solitary existence and prepare him for what was to come. It was a baptism of sorts, a spiritual cleansing rendered in the elements of the desert. He felt a growing awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. The stones were not merely rocks, they were anchors, grounded in the deep heart of the earth, holding within them the memory of creation. The feather was not just a discarded plume, it was a fragment of a winged spirit, a messenger from realms unseen. The water was not just H2O, it was a life giving essence, a mirror reflecting the vastness of the cosmos. And he, the solitary coyote, was not an isolated entity, but a thread woven into this intricate tapestry, a participant in a grand, unfolding narrative. The breeze seemed to confirm this, weaving him into the fabric of the place, making him a part of its story. The breeze carried with it the subtle, earthy fragrance of sagebrush, a scent that spoke of cleansing and protection in many indigenous traditions. It was a scent that seemed to sharpen his senses, to lift the veil of ordinary perception and allow him to see the world as it truly was, a place imbued with spirit, with hidden meanings, and with a profound, inherent vitality. He inhaled deeply, the scent filling his lungs, feeling it permeate his being, awakening dormant parts of his consciousness. It was as if the very air was a conduit, carrying wisdom from the ancient past directly to him. He began to understand that the desert was not an empty canvas, but a living, breathing entity. Its apparent barrenness was a deceptive surface, concealing a vibrant, complex ecosystem, a network of life that pulsed with unseen energy. The breeze was its voice, its exhalation, a constant stream of communication for those who had the patience and the sensitivity to listen. It spoke of the patience of the stone, weathered by eons of wind and sun, of the resilience of the cactus, storing life giving water within its thorny embrace, of the swiftness of the jackrabbit, a flash of fur against the ochre dust. The breeze seemed to gather strength, growing from a gentle caress to a more insistent presence. It swirled around him, ruffling his fur, whispering secrets against his sensitive ears. He felt a sense of being embraced, held within the very atmosphere of this sacred place. It was a palpable connection, a confirmation that he was not just an accidental visitor, but someone who had been expected, anticipated. The echoes of his laughter, the sound that had drawn him here, seemed to resonate with the movement of the air, a sonic echo within the breath of the land. He opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping across the moonlit basin, the shadows cast by the canyon walls seemed to deepen, to take on a more solid form, as if they too were part of the living landscape. The stars, scattered across the velvet sky, seemed to wink and shimmer with a newfound intensity, their light amplified by the pristine desert air. The breeze continued its work, carrying with it a subtle warmth that belied the coolness of the night, a gentle heat that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. This was the breath of the land, he realized, and it was an invitation to shed the burdens of his past, to release the solitary shell he had constructed around himself, an invitation to connect, to participate, to become a part of something larger than himself. The scent of sagebrush mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of night blooming flowers, a fragrance that seemed to bloom only when touched by the moon's silver light. It was a symphony of scents, a testament to the hidden life that thrived in the desert's nocturnal embrace. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a calm acceptance of his presence in this sacred space. The anxieties that had accompanied his solitary journey began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet wonder and a deep reverence. The breeze seemed to carry away his doubts, his fears, leaving him feeling lighter, more attuned to the subtle energies that flowed through the land. It was as if the very air was whispering words of encouragement, of validation, telling him that he was on the right path. The breeze played across the surface of the water in the bowl, creating a subtle shimmer, a play of light that was mesmerizing. It hinted at a depth, a hidden current beneath the placid surface, a metaphor for the spiritual currents that lay beneath the desert's seemingly unyielding exterior. He understood in that moment that true understanding came not from force or conquest, but from attunement, from allowing oneself to be moved by the subtle forces that shaped existence. He remained still, his body a conduit for the land's breath. He felt the dust settle on his fur, the cool air on his nose, the faint tremor of the earth beneath his paws. Every sensation was amplified, every nuance of the environment registered and understood on a primal level. The breeze was a constant reminder of the living presence of the desert, a presence that had been there long before him and would continue long after. It was a testament to the enduring power of nature, a force that shaped, sustained, and ultimately revealed. The scent of creosote, sharp and clean, was also present, a signature fragrance of the arid lands, often associated with the promise of rain, even in its absence. It was a scent of resilience, of survival, of life finding a way. This combination of scents, sagebrush, night blooming flowers, creosote, created a complex olfactory tapestry, each element contributing to the overall message of the land, a message of life, of endurance, and of deep, ancient wisdom. The breeze carried these scents to him, not as a cacophony, but as a harmonious chorus, each note distinct, yet contributing to a unified symphony. He felt a nascent understanding stirring within him, a dawning awareness of the land's inherent power. This power was not aggressive or destructive. but nurturing and transformative. It was the power of cycles, of renewal, of the slow, inexorable shaping of the world. The breeze was the embodiment of this power, a gentle force that could erode mountains over eons or carry the seeds of new life across vast distances. It was a reminder that even the smallest movements could have profound consequences. The moonlight seemed to be absorbed by the very earth and then exhaled by the breeze, a cycle of lunar energy being distributed throughout the basin. He felt this energy as a gentle thrumming, a subtle vibration that resonated with the rhythm of his own heart. It was as if the land was breathing in the light and breathing out life, and he was a part of that exchange. The air felt thick with this lunar energy, a palpable hum that intensified his awareness and his connection to the place. He realized that his laughter, the sound that had been the catalyst for his arrival, was not an anomaly in the desert's silence. It was a response to the land's own subtle music, a joyous affirmation of the life that persisted here, unseen by most. The breeze, in its gentle caress, seemed to confirm this, weaving his own energetic signature into the larger tapestry of the land's resonance. His presence was not an intrusion, but a continuation, a new note in an ancient song. The sensation of the breeze was more than just air movement. It was a subtle current of information, a download of the desert's essence. It carried with it the memories of the sun's intense heat, the coolness of the desert night, the slow grinding of rock against rock, the patient growth of a single blade of grass. It was a living history, breathed into existence and carried on the wind. He absorbed this information, not through conscious thought, but through an instinctive understanding that bypassed the need for translation. He felt a deep respect for the quiet persistence of this landscape, for its ability to hold so much life and so many secrets within its seemingly desolate expanse. The breeze was a constant reminder of this, a gentle nudge to look beyond the surface, to perceive the vibrant pulse that lay beneath. It was a lesson in humility, in the understanding that true power often resided in stillness, in patience, and in the subtle interplay of forces that governed existence. As the breeze continued to play around him, he felt a profound sense of belonging. The initial bewilderment he had felt upon arriving at the basin had given way to a deep, quiet certainty. This was where he was meant to be. The breath of the land had welcomed him, not as a conqueror or an intruder, but as a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on the ancient paths of existence. The desert, in its vastness and its silence, had found a way to speak to him, and he, through the receptive channels opened by his laughter and his solitary journey, had finally learned to listen. The breeze was the ongoing conversation, the continuous exchange between himself and the living spirit of this ancient place. The intricate dance of the moonlight, the subtle scents, and the ever present breeze converged to create an atmosphere of profound communion, a silent acknowledgement that his journey had led him to a place of deep meaning and belonging. The night sky, which had seemed a static, immutable vault of pinprick diamonds, began to betray its true nature. The familiar constellations etched into the human consciousness for millennia, started a slow, deliberate waltz, the Great Bear, Ursa Major. Its dipper, a ladle of cosmic light, seemed to stretch and reform, its stars drifting with an almost imperceptible languor. Orion, the hunter, his belt of three bright stars, a beacon against the darkness, appeared to shift his stance, the angle of his stellar bow subtly altered. It was as if the celestial cartographer, the unseen hand that had sketched these patterns, was now adding new strokes, redefining the very lines that charted the heavens. The fixed points of light were no longer fixed. They were alive, participants in an unfolding cosmic drama. This celestial metamorphosis was not a violent upheaval, but a profound, graceful realignment. The stars didn't flicker or crash. They flowed, their movements as smooth and deliberate as the turning of a colossal celestial gear. It was a language spoken in light and distance, a story told in the shifting geometry of the universe. The coyote, attuned to the subtlest shifts in his environment, felt this change not just with his eyes, but with his entire being. The air, already charged with the land's breath, now seemed to carry the resonance of these stellar movements, a low, harmonious hum that vibrated through the earth and into his bones. The familiar patterns began to bleed into one another, constellations merging and separating in a dance that defied earthly logic. The North Star, Polaris, steadfast and true, remained a point of reference, yet its surrounding heavens seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with an almost organic rhythm. This was not chaos, it was a reordering, a cosmic choreography that spoke of a deep, underlying principles far beyond human comprehension. The starlight, usually a constant, seemed to pulse with a newfound vitality, each twinkle a deliberate beat in a universal rhythm. It was as if the universe was drawing a deep, slow breath, and with that breath, the stars were rearranging themselves to signify a momentous occasion. He observed, with an ancient instinct that bypassed learned knowledge, how the celestial bodies interacted. A particular cluster of stars, previously unremarkable, now seemed to draw closer to another, forming a new, luminous tableau. It was as if ancient texts, half forgotten myths inscribed in the sky, were being rewritten in real time. The Big Dipper no longer pointed solely to Polaris. It seemed to sweep across a broader arc, its stellar stream now directed towards a different celestial marker, one that had previously been obscured, or perhaps had not yet been defined in this particular epoch of time. The patterns shifted, not randomly, but with a discernible intent, suggesting a narrative unfolding across the vastness of space. The moon, though still dominating the landscape with its soft luminescence, also played a subtle role in this cosmic ballet. Its light, usually diffused and gentle, now seemed to gather and concentrate in specific areas of the sky, highlighting the newly forming constellations. It acted as a celestial spotlight, illuminating the stages where new stellar dramas were being enacted. The interplay between the moon's light and the shifting stars created a breathtaking spectacle, a dynamic, living map of the heavens that was both awe inspiring and deeply unsettling in its departure from the familiar. The coyote felt a prickling sensation along his spine, a primal recognition of a significant shift. This was not a meteor shower, nor the passage of a comet. This was a fundamental alteration of the celestial sphere, a cosmic event that resonated with the very core of his being. The wind, carrying the scents of sage and dust, also seemed to carry whispers of cosmic dust, the shed remnants of forming stars and nebulae, adding another layer to the sensory tapestry of the night. He watched as a familiar pattern, perhaps Cassiopeia, the queen seated on her throne, seemed to melt and reform, her stars drawing together into a tighter, more radiant formation. It was as if the very fabric of space-time was being subtly manipulated, guided by an unseen hand to create a new cosmic language. This was not just a visual phenomenon, it was a profound, energetic shift, a realignment of cosmic forces that had direct implications for the terrestrial realm. The energy emanating from these celestial changes was palpable, a subtle pressure that permeated the up air and the ground beneath him. The traditional understanding of these star patterns, the stories and myths that had guided generations, now seemed insufficient. They were like old maps, pointing to landmarks that were no longer in their accustomed places. The sky was no longer a reliable chart of the past, but a living testament to the present, an unfolding prophecy written in starlight. The sheer scale of this celestial event underscored the insignificance of individual concerns, yet simultaneously it highlighted the profound interconnectedness of all things. His own presence, the solitary coyote in this moonlit basin, felt intrinsically linked to the grand cosmic opera unfolding above. He felt an intuitive understanding bloom within him, a knowledge that transcended logic. The shifting constellations were not arbitrary. They were forming a new pattern, a celestial Rosetta Stone that held the key to the revelations about to be unveiled. Perhaps they represented a new alignment of spiritual forces, a closing of one cosmic cycle and the opening of another. The stars, in their new configurations, seemed to speak directly to the heart of the land, to the ancient stones, and to the silent watcher. The movement of the stars was slow enough to be almost imperceptible to a casual observer, but for the coyote, whose senses were honed to the finest nuances, it was a constant, evolving spectacle. He could trace the subtle drift of stars, the gradual morphing of familiar shapes into new, evocative forms. One cluster seemed to blossom like a celestial flower, its points of light unfolding outwards, while another contracted, its stars coalescing into a brilliant, singular point of focus. This was not a static universe. It was a dynamic, ever-changing entity, and tonight its dynamism was on full display, orchestrated by forces that governed existence itself. The implications of this celestial alignment were not lost on him. If the heavens themselves were in flux, then the terrestrial realm and the hidden truths it held must also be subject to this grand cosmic reordering. The patterns in the sky were a reflection, a mirror to the terrestrial transformations that were imminent. The energy gathered in the celestial ballet was flowing downwards, infusing the earth, the stones, and the very air with a potent, transformative power. This was a universe in motion, a symphony of creation and transformation, and he was a privileged witness, a creature whose journey had led him to the nexus of these cosmic currents. He noticed that the colors of the stars seemed to deepen, their light acquiring an almost tangible quality. Some stars pulsed with a soft blue hue, others with a fiery red, and still others with a pure, incandescent white. This chromatic shift was not merely a trick of the light, it felt like a manifestation of different energies, different cosmic forces converging and interacting. The night sky was no longer monochrome. It was a vibrant, multi-hued canvas painted with the very essence of stellar creation. The shift in the constellations was not a destruction of the old, but a creative synthesis. The stars that formed the ancient patterns were still present, but their grouping, their relationships to one another, had been reconfigured. It was as if the archetypes of the heavens were being reinterpreted, their symbolic meanings recontextualized for a new era, a new understanding. The coyote felt a growing sense of anticipation, a certainty that these celestial changes were directly heralding the unveiling of profound truths. The wind continued its gentle song, and with each breath it seemed to carry a new stellar configuration, a subtle adjustment in the cosmic order. The sagebrush, its leaves silvered by the moonlight, seemed to rustle with a deeper resonance, as if acknowledging the celestial decree. The stones, ancient and silent, appeared to absorb the shifting starlight, their surfaces momentarily illuminated with patterns that mirrored the heavens above. He was a part of a living, breathing universe where the terrestrial and the celestial were inextricably linked in a perpetual dance of creation and revelation. The stars were not just distant suns, they were markers on a cosmic roadmap, guiding him, and perhaps the entire world, towards an unknown yet inevitable destination. The celestial alignment was the universe's way of signaling that the time for revelation had arrived, and the heavens themselves were bearing witness. The wind, though it had begun to stir the desert grasses and whisper through the sparse mesquite, seemed to shy away from the small, solitary feather. It lay beside the shallow bowl of water, a single, downy plume, impossibly still. This was not the stillness of abandonment, nor of fragility yielding to the elements. It was a stillness that spoke of an inherent strength, a deep, grounded presence that defied the subtle nudges of the night air. The feather, white and tinged with the faintest blush of dawn, seemed to absorb the ambient moonlight, its surface catching and reflecting the celestial glow with an almost conscious awareness. It was a point of absolute calm in the landscape, a tiny island of unwavering tranquility amidst the gentle yet persistent movements of the desert night. This stillness was, in itself, a form of language. The coyote, his senses still reeling from the celestial ballet above, felt drawn to this small object. It wasn't just its visual presence, it was an emanation, a quiet assertion of being that resonated with the profound shifts he had witnessed in the heavens. The feather seemed to hold, within its delicate structure, a memory of the events that had just unfolded, a silent testament to the unraveling and reweaving of cosmic patterns. It was more than mere detritus of a passing bird. It felt like a fragment of the revelation itself, a physical anchor to the intangible energies that had permeated the night. He approached it slowly, his paws sinking slightly into the cool, yielding sand. The feather lay there, not as something lost, but as something placed. Its position, so precise beside the bowl, suggested intent, a deliberate placement that spoke of a ritual or a message. The water, still and reflective, mirrored the sky's grand reordering, and beside it, this feather seemed to mirror the earth's receptive stillness. It was as if the universe, in its act of cosmic self expression, had left this single, perfect artifact as a tangible signpost, a subtle clue for the seeker. The feather possessed an aura, a palpable presence that transcended its physical form. It was as if the very essence of stillness, of quiet observation, had coalesced into this single plume. It was a witness, silent yet potent, to the profound changes that had been wrought. It had perhaps seen the coyote's own transformation, the moments of confusion and dawning comprehension, and now it lay there, a promise of further unveiling, a key that might unlock not just the celestial mysteries, but the lost fragments of the coyote's own being. He lowered his head, his muzzle almost touching the feather. He could discern no scent that was alien to the desert, no trace of predator or prey. Yet there was a distinct energy, a subtle vibration that hummed beneath the surface of his awareness. This feather, he sensed, carried a history of its own, a lineage of forgotten journeys and silent watchfulness. It was more than just a feather shed from a wing. It was a testament to a forgotten pact, a whisper from an ancient lineage that was now resurfacing in the wake of the celestial reordering. The delicate barbs of the feather were perfectly aligned, each barbule interlocking with its neighbor in a flawless display of natural engineering. This intricate structure, designed for flight, now seemed to serve a different purpose. It was a monument to equilibrium, a symbol of perfect balance found within the seeming chaos of existence. The coyote remembered the dizzying array of shifting stars, the redefinition of celestial landscapes, and then his gaze had fallen upon this feather, its unwavering stillness a counterpoint to the cosmic dance. It was as if the universe, having performed its grand, dynamic symphony, had then presented this single, quiet note as its final, most profound statement. He felt a pull, an instinctual urge to touch it, to connect with its silent narrative. But caution, honed by eons of survival, held him back. This was a moment of profound significance, and hasty action could shatter the fragile equilibrium that had been established. The feather was an invitation, a silent beckoning to understand the connections between the sky above and the earth below, between the grand cosmic movements and the smallest, most unassuming objects that grace the terrestrial realm. The moonlight, filtering through the vast, star-dusted expanse, illuminated the feather in stark relief. It seemed to glow with an inner light, a soft luminescence that was not merely reflected, but emanated from within. This was not the fleeting shimmer of dew or the ephemeral sparkle of mica in the rock. This was a light that suggested deep reservoirs of power, a light that had absorbed the very essence of the stars, and now offered it back to the world in a form that was both comprehensible and profound. It was a beacon in the darkness, a silent harbinger of the truths that were slowly, inexorably beginning to unfold. The feather's lineage, he suspected, stretched back to a time before the current constellations had been etched into human memory, perhaps even before the forms of terrestrial creatures had been fully defined. It was a relic of a more primordial time, a time when the lines between the spiritual and the material were blurred, when the flight of a bird could carry the weight of cosmic significance. Its stillness was not a sign of dormancy, but of a profound internal knowing. It had witnessed the cycles of creation and dissolution, the ebb and flow of cosmic energies, and it had learned the quiet strength of enduring presence. He circled the feather slowly, his senses drinking in every detail, the texture, the subtle variations in its white hue, the almost imperceptible curve of its shaft. Each element seemed to possess a specific resonance. It was a single, perfect entity, a microcosm of the universe's grand design. The wind, now a gentle sigh against his fur, carried no disruption to its perfect poise. It was as if the feather existed in its own pocket of absolute stillness, a sanctuary of peace in the midst of the unfolding cosmic drama. The feather was an enigma, a question posed in the silence of the night. It lay there, not demanding an answer, but offering a path to understanding. It was a tangible piece of the puzzle, a silent invitation to connect the fragmented visions of the shifting stars with the deeper, more enduring truths of the land. He felt a sense of profound connection, not just to the celestial events, but to this small, white feather, a connection that felt both ancient and intensely personal. It was as if his own journey, his own quest for lost identity, had led him directly to this point, to this silent witness that held the promise of revelation. The bowl of water beside it, catching the starlight, seemed to hold the reflection of a different sky, a sky reordered, its familiar patterns dissolved and reformed. The feather, juxtaposed with this celestial reflection, seemed to bridge the gap between the infinite expanse of the heavens and the grounded reality of the earth. It was a conduit, a focal point where cosmic energy could be grounded, translated into a language that the earthly realm could comprehend. Its stillness was not passivity, it was an active state of receptivity, a readiness to receive and to impart knowledge. He observed the way the moonlight played across its surface, creating subtle shifts in shadow and light that seemed to hint at hidden depths. It was as if the feather itself was a map, its intricate structure a coded message waiting to be deciphered. The stories whispered by the shifting stars above now seemed to find a terrestrial echo in this small, white plume. It was a silent symphony, a visual poem that spoke of cycles, transformations, and the enduring power of stillness in a universe of constant motion. The coyote, his senses sharpened by the extraordinary events of the night, felt a deep sense of awe. This feather, so unassuming, held within it a power that rivaled the grandeur of the moving constellations. It was a reminder that revelation often came not in thunderous pronouncements, but in the quiet whispers of the natural world, in the objects that seemed to exist outside the flow of time, yet were intrinsically connected to its deepest currents. It was a testament to the idea that even the smallest things could hold the greatest significance, especially when they were placed at the nexus of celestial and terrestrial transformation. The stillness of the feather was not an emptiness, but a fullness, a quiet reservoir of cosmic understanding, waiting patiently for the moment of its own unveiling. It was the universe's gentle nudge, a confirmation that the unveiling was not just a cosmic event, but a deeply personal one, and that the answers, or at least the path to them, lay not only in the stars, but also at his very paws. The water, undisturbed by even the slightest zephyr, lay like a polished obsidian disk within its shallow clay bowl. It held the vast, indifferent expanse of the night sky captive, a perfect, inverted cosmos where constellations blazed with an unnerving clarity. The faint dust of the Milky Way, a spectral river of light, flowed across its mirrored surface, and the distant pinpricks of individual stars were rendered with an astonishing fidelity. It was a reflection so pure, so devoid of distortion, that it seemed less like a mirroring and more like a direct aperture into the celestial realm. The surrounding desert, rendered in shades of charcoal and silver by the moon, was pushed to the periphery, the water's surface a supreme dominion of starlight. Beside this shimmering pool, the coyote, a creature of primal instinct and silent observation, knelt. His form, lean and shadowed, was clearly delineated against the pale sand, a sentinel rooted to the earth. But it was not his physical presence that held the eye, nor the stillness of the feather that lay near, but the profound stillness of the water itself. It was a stillness that echoed the profound cosmic recalibration he had witnessed, a stillness that suggested a moment of absolute suspension, a breath held before the next unfolding. This was not merely water, it was a liquid eye gazing into the heart of the universe, and in doing so, offering a glimpse into the heart of all things. As the coyote's gaze dropped from the heavens to the water's surface, it was met by his own reflection. Yet, it was a reflection subtly altered, imbued with a resonance that transcended the mere play of light and shadow upon fur and bone. The eyes that stared back were not entirely his own. They held a depth, a flicker of ancient awareness, a recognition that sent a tremor through his being. It was as if the water, in its perfect mirroring, had not only captured the night sky, but had also delved into the deepest, most forgotten strata of his own consciousness, unearthing something that had been buried for eons. He saw himself, yes, but overlaid, intertwined with fleeting images that were both alien and achingly familiar. A flash of a different form, a shadow of a gate more upright, the ghost of hands that reached not for prey, but for something intangible, something held within the palm. These were not memories that surfaced in the usual way, triggered by scent or sound. These were impressions carried within the very substance of the water, reflections of possibilities, of paths not taken, or perhaps of paths that had been. The water was a veil, and through its clear depths, he saw the spectral outlines of other existences, other lives that were inextricably woven into the fabric of his own. The reflection was a paradox. It was undeniably him, the solitary hunter of the desert night, yet it was also a composite, a living palimpsest of selves. The water, in its passive mirroring, had become an active agent of revelation. It did not judge, did not explain, but simply presented, offering a kaleidoscope of fragmented truths. He saw himself as a watcher, an observer, as he was now, but also as a participant, a craftsman, a being who moved with a different kind of grace, a grace born not of predatory stealth, but of intentional creation. He lowered his head further, his muzzle almost brushing the surface. The coolness of the water seemed to seep into his senses, drawing him deeper into this strange, luminous realm. The stars, reflected there, pulsed with an inner light, and as he watched, they seemed to coalesce, to form patterns that were not celestial, but ancestral. He saw the outline of a fire, not the crackling blaze of the desert night, but a controlled, warm glow around which figures moved with purpose. These figures were indistinct, their features blurred by the passage of time and the unreliability of reflected memory. Yet their presence was undeniable. They were his kin, he sensed, but from an epoch so distant that their memory had been reduced to this shimmering, watery echo. The water acted as a conduit, a silent bridge between the primal present and the forgotten past. It was a liquid scroll, unfurling its contents with the quiet persistence of a tide. He saw fleeting glimpses of what might have been hands, shaping something from clay, or perhaps weaving with fibers. There were moments of contemplation, of looking upwards, not with the animal's instinctive vigilance, but with a questing intelligence. The reflection was a question posed in liquid form. Who were you before you were this? Who were you when the stars sang a different song and the earth held different secrets? He felt a strange resonance with these spectral figures, a kinship that transcended the physical. It was as if the water, in reflecting his current form, also recognized and amplified the faint, dormant echoes of his more distant lineage. The events of the night, the shifting of celestial bodies, had seemingly awakened something dormant within him, And the water, with its uncanny clarity, was now the mirror to this internal awakening. It was a quiet unveiling, not of external truths, but of internal landscapes, long obscured by the mists of time and the necessities of survival. He shifted his weight, and his reflection rippled, distorting the starry sky above. The perfect mirroring was broken for a moment, and in that brief distortion, he saw a flash of pure, unadulterated power, a surge of energy that felt innate, untamed. It was not the power of the predator, the swift strike or the crushing bite, but a power of creation, of intention, of shaping reality with a focused will. It was a power that had been leashed, perhaps even forgotten, but it was undeniably there, stirring in the depths of his being as surely as the stars were reflected in the water. The stillness of the water was not merely the absence of motion, it was a state of profound receptivity. It absorbed the light of the heavens and the form of the coyote, but it also absorbed something more, the latent potential, the dormant memories, the unexpressed truths that resided within him. It was a sacred space, a place where the boundaries between self and other, between present and past, began to dissolve. The coyote, in gazing into this liquid eye, was not just seeing his reflection, he was seeing the repository of his own obscured history. He noticed how, when he remained perfectly still, the reflections began to stabilize, to clarify. The fleeting images grew sharper, the spectral figures more defined. He saw a hand, its fingers long and dexterous, tracing patterns in the sand, patterns that seemed to mirror the constellations above. There was a profound connection between the celestial and the terrestrial, a dialogue conducted through form and light, and the coyote, or the earlier iterations of his being, were active participants in this dialogue. The water was not just reflecting, it was translating, converting the silent language of the stars into a visual narrative of his own ancestral past. This was the unveiling the feather had hinted at. It was not a sudden, explosive revelation, but a slow, quiet immersion into forgotten truths. The water was a silent teacher, its lessons imprinted in the shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was a mirror that not only showed what was, but also what had been, and perhaps what could be again. He felt a primal urge to reach into the water, to touch these spectral forms, to grasp the tangible remnants of his lost heritage. But a deeper instinct, honed by the night's celestial revelations, held him back. This was not a moment for forceful intervention, but for patient observation, for allowing the water to reveal its secrets at its own pace. The water's reflection was a universe unto itself, holding within its small expanse the echoes of cosmic grandeur and the whispers of forgotten lives. It was a reminder that the self was not a static entity, but a flowing river, carrying within its currents the sediment of countless experiences, of lives lived and unlived. The coyote, in his present form, was but one manifestation, one point in a vast continuum. The water held the memory of that continuum, and by gazing into it, he was beginning to remember himself, not just as the solitary hunter of the desert, but as a thread woven into the grand tapestry of existence. He focused on a particular reflection, a fleeting image of a being standing, gazing up at the night sky with an expression of profound wonder. There was a familiarity in the posture, a curve of the spine, a tilt of the head that resonated deep within his bones. This was not just a reflection of the sky, it was a reflection of a shared consciousness, a commonality of spirit that transcended species and time. The water was a testament to the interconnectedness of all things, a reminder that even in his current solitary existence, he was not truly alone. He was part of a lineage, a stream of consciousness that had flowed from those figures reflected in the water through countless transformations to reach this very moment. The act of reflection in the water was a form of remembrance, a gentle coaxing of the buried past into the present. It was a confrontation with his own history, not through the learned narratives of others, but through the direct experience of seeing it mirrored before him. The desert night, with its celestial rearrangements, had set the stage for this internal unveiling, and the water was its most potent instrument. It was a silent, liquid oracle, offering glimpses of truths that lay dormant within, waiting for the right moment, the right reflection to emerge. The coyote felt a sense of profound gratitude for this simple bowl of water, for its unadulterated clarity and its unwavering ability to hold the universe, both without and within. It was a baptism of sorts, a washing away of the veils that had obscured his deeper identity, a silent invitation to step into the fullness of his own unfolding story. The water, in its perfect stillness, held the promise of understanding, a quiet assurance that the revelations of the night were not confined to the heavens, but were deeply inscribed within the very essence of his being, waiting to be seen. The echo of laughter had faded, a ephemeral whisper against the vast canvas of the desert night. Yet it had not truly vanished. It had transformed, transmuted from a sound into a resonance, a subtle vibration that now hummed beneath the skin of existence. The coyote, still poised beside the water's reflective stillness, felt its lingering presence not in his ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. This was no longer the boisterous mirth that had startled him from his nocturnal prowl. It was a deeper, more profound intimation, a silent call that had drawn him to this place, to this liquid mirror of the cosmos. He had answered the call, not with sound, but with his very being. His presence here, kneeling at the edge of the water, was an answer in itself. It was a testament to the primal curiosity that stirred within him, the instinct that drove him to seek, to understand, to connect with the mysteries that lay just beyond the ordinary. The initial impetus, the inexplicable mirth, had been the spark, and his journey to this quiet oasis was the inevitable ignition. Now, the fire burned low, not extinguished, but banked, waiting for the right wind to fan its flames. The silence that settled around him was not an emptiness, but a fullness. It was a pregnant pause, heavy with unspoken potential, a vast, receptive space that seemed to hold its breath, awaiting revelation. The desert, usually alive with the scuttling of unseen creatures and the whisper of wind through scrub, seemed to have been hushed, all its usual nocturnal symphonies muted in deference to this moment. The stars, which had appeared so stark and distant moments before, now felt closer, their light imbued with a more intimate significance. They were not just distant fires, they were signposts, ancient intelligences observing, perhaps even guiding. His senses, already honed by the rigors of desert life, were now sharpened to an almost unbearable acuity. Every grain of sand beneath his paws seemed to register. Every shift in the atmospheric pressure registered as a change in the very fabric of reality. He could feel the subtle ebb and flow of energies he had never before perceived, a silent conversation between the land, the heavens, and the hidden forces that governed them. It was as if the celestial recalibration he had witnessed in the water's depths had also occurred within him, a retuning of his own internal instruments to a higher, more subtle frequency. He remained perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow and instinct. To move would be to break the spell, to disturb the delicate balance that had been achieved. He had followed the echo, the intangible thread that had pulled him across the arid landscape. He had arrived, and now his purpose was to wait, to allow the land, the stars, and the unseen forces to unfold their intentions. The silence was not a void to be filled with his own noise, but a presence to be acknowledged, a space to be inhabited with respectful attention. The water, with its perfect reflection of the celestial panorama, served as a constant reminder of the vastness that stretched beyond his immediate perception. It was a gateway, not just to the stars, but to a deeper understanding of his own place within that immensity. The fragmented images he had seen in its depths, the ghost of upright forms, the spectral flicker of hands creating, the warmth of a communal fire, were not mere phantoms. They were echoes of his own lineage, whisperings from a past that was not separate from him, but intrinsically woven into his very being. The water had shown him that his current form, that of the solitary coyote, was but one iteration in a long, unbroken chain of existence. He felt a profound connection to the figures he had glimpsed. There was a resonance in their posture, a familiarity in the way they gazed upwards. It spoke of a shared yearning, a common spirit that transcended the boundaries of species and time. The water, in its passive mirroring, had become an active conduit, translating the silent language of the stars into a visual narrative of his own ancestral story. This was not a history learned from elders or etched in stone, but a living, breathing testament revealed in the play of light and shadow upon a surface of pure water. The silence now was not a passive state, but an active engagement. It was a space where the universe spoke, and he, the coyote, was the attentive listener. He observed the subtle dance of the reflected stars, noticing how their patterns seemed to shift and coalesce, forming constellations that were not merely celestial arrangements, but also ancestral symbols. He saw the outlines of ancient hands, not grasping for prey, but shaping, creating, leaving their mark upon the world. These were not random visions, they were affirmations, confirmations of a deeper heritage that lay dormant within him, waiting for the right circumstances to awaken. The feather, lying innocently beside the water, seemed to hold a significance now that transcended its physical form. It was a symbol, a harbinger of the unveiling that had begun. It had hinted at a larger truth, a cosmic recalibration, and the water had served as the crucible for this revelation. The silence that followed was the natural consequence of such a profound encounter, a moment of absorption, of integration. Before the next step could be taken, he shifted his weight, a slow, deliberate movement. The surface of the water rippled, distorting the celestial images for a fleeting moment. In that brief disruption, he felt a surge of latent power, a raw energy that was not predatory, but creative. It was the power of intention, of shaping reality with a focused will, a power that had been suppressed or forgotten, but was now stirring within him, as undeniable as the stars reflected in the water. The water was a mirror to his current self, but it was also a window into the potential that lay within, a reminder that the capacity for creation was an intrinsic part of his being, not merely a vestige of a distant past. The stillness of the water was a profound lesson in receptivity. It had absorbed the light of the heavens and the form of the coyote, but it had also absorbed something more profound, the dormant memories, the latent potential, the unexpressed truths that resided within him. It was a sacred space, a place where the boundaries between self and other, between the present moment and the vast continuum of time, began to dissolve. The coyote, in gazing into this liquid eye, was not merely seeing his reflection, he was seeing the repository of his own obscured history, a living testament to the interconnectedness of all existence. He lowered his head further, the coolness of the water seeping into his senses, drawing him deeper into this luminous realm. The stars reflected, their pulsed with an inner light, and as he watched, they seemed to coalesce, to form patterns that were not celestial, but ancestral. He saw the outline of a fire, not the crackling blaze of the desert night, but a controlled, warm glow around which figures moved with purpose. These figures were indistinct, their features blurred by the passage of time and the unreliability of reflected memory. Yet their presence was undeniable. They were his kin, he sensed, but from an epoch so distant that their memory had been reduced to this shimmering, watery echo. The water acted as a conduit, a silent bridge between the primal present and the forgotten past. It was a liquid scroll, unfurling its contents with the quiet persistence of a tide. He saw fleeting glimpses of what might have been hands, shaping something from clay or perhaps weaving with fibers. There were moments of contemplation, of looking upwards, not with the animal's instinctive vigilance, but with a questing intelligence. The reflection was a question posed in liquid form. Who were you before you were this? Who were you when the stars sang a different song and the earth held different secrets? He felt a strange resonance with these spectral figures, a kinship that transcended the physical. It was as if the water, in reflecting his current form, also recognized and amplified the faint, dormant echoes of his more distant lineage. The events of the night, the shifting of celestial bodies, had seemingly awakened something dormant within him, and the water, with its uncanny clarity, was now the mirror to this internal awakening. It was a quiet unveiling, not of external truths, but of internal landscapes, long obscured by the mists of time and the necessities of survival. He noticed how, when he remained perfectly still, the reflections began to stabilize, to clarify. The fleeting images grew sharper, the spectral figures more defined. He saw a hand, its fingers long and dexterous, tracing patterns in the sand, patterns that seemed to mirror the constellations above. There was a profound connection between the celestial and the terrestrial, a dialogue conducted through form and light, and the coyote, or the earlier iterations of his being, were active participants in this dialogue. The water was not just reflecting, it was translating, converting the silent language of the stars into a visual narrative of his own ancestral past. This was the unveiling the feather had hinted at. It was not a sudden, explosive revelation, but a slow, quiet immersion into forgotten truths. The water was a silent teacher, its lessons imprinted in the shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was a mirror that not only showed what was, but also what had been, and perhaps what could be again. He felt a primal urge to reach into the water, to touch these spectral forms, to grasp the tangible remnants of his lost heritage. But a deeper instinct, honed by the night's celestial revelations, held him back. This was not a moment for forceful intervention, but for patient observation, for allowing the water to reveal its secrets at its own pace. The water's reflection was a universe unto itself, holding within its small expanse the echoes of cosmic grandeur and the whispers of forgotten lives. It was a reminder that the self was not a static entity, but a flowing river, carrying within its currents the sediment of countless experiences, of lives lived and unlived. The coyote, in his current form, was but one manifestation, one point in a vast continuum. The water held the memory of that continuum, and by gazing into it, he was beginning to remember himself, not just as the solitary hunter of the desert, but as a thread woven into the grand tapestry of existence. He focused on a particular reflection, a fleeting image of a being standing, gazing up at the night sky with an expression of profound wonder. There was a familiarity in the posture, a curve of the spine, a tilt of the head that resonated deep within his bones. This was not just a reflection of the sky. It was a reflection of a shared consciousness, a commonality of spirit that transcended species and time. The water was a testament to the interconnectedness of all things, a reminder that even in his current solitary existence, he was not truly alone. He was part of a lineage, a stream of consciousness that had flowed from those figures reflected in the water through countless transformations to reach this very moment. The act of reflection in the water was a form of remembrance, a gentle coaxing of the buried past into the present. It was a confrontation with his own history, not through the learned narratives of others, but through the direct experience of seeing it mirrored before him. The desert night, with its celestial rearrangements, had set the stage for this internal unveiling, and the water was its most potent instrument. It was a silent, liquid oracle, offering glimpses of truths that lay dormant within, waiting for the right moment, the right reflection to emerge. The coyote felt a sense of profound gratitude for this simple bowl of water, for its unadulterated clarity and its unwavering ability to hold the universe, both without and within. It was a baptism of sorts, a washing away of the veils that had obscured his deeper identity, a silent invitation to step into the fullness of his own unfolding story. The water, in its perfect stillness, held the promise of understanding, a quiet assurance that the revelations of the night were not confined to the heavens, but were deeply inscribed within the very essence of his being, waiting to be seen. The silence continued, a deep and pervasive stillness that allowed the subtle whispers of the land to be heard. He sensed a gentle pressure against his thoughts, not invasive, but suggestive, like the soft brush of a wing against his ear. It was the land itself, perhaps, or the collective consciousness of this ancient place, acknowledging his presence and the transformation that was occurring within him. The stars, no longer just distant lights, seemed to hum with a low, resonant frequency, a cosmic choir singing a song of belonging. He felt a profound sense of rightness in this quietude. The initial burst of laughter, the impetus for his journey, had served its purpose. It had been the initial tremor that shook loose the dust of complacency, revealing the deeper currents that lay beneath. Now, this silence was the fertile ground upon which new understanding could take root. He was not merely an observer of the night's wonders, he was becoming a participant, his own existence now intertwined with the cosmic dance he witnessed. The water held his reflection, a constant, unwavering gaze that seemed to penetrate beyond the physical. It showed him not just his current form, but the layered depths of his being, the ancestral echoes that comprised his true essence. The silence was not an end, but a beginning, a space where the answers to questions he had not yet articulated were beginning to coalesce. He waited, not with impatience, but with a quiet certainty, for the next unfolding. The night had drawn him here, and the silence was now inviting him to listen. He had answered the call, and the next step was to receive. The land, the stars, and the unseen forces were speaking, and he, the coyote, was finally ready to hear. The silence which had been a palpable presence, a testament to the profound stillness of the desert night, was now gently, imperceptibly broken. It was not the rustle of unseen creatures or the sigh of the wind that disturbed it, but something far more significant, something that resonated not just with his ears, but with the very core of his being. From the distant, star-dusted rim of the horizon, a sound began to unfurl, a delicate thread of audibility woven into the tapestry of the night. At first it was so faint, so ethereal, that he might have dismissed it as a trick of the vast, open stillness, a lingering echo of the laughter that had drawn him here. Yet, as he listened, his keen senses instantly discerning its unique texture, he realized this was something entirely new. It was a voice, distinct and resonant, a clear utterance that sliced through the immensity of the desolate landscape like a celestial beam. This was no disembodied phenomenon, no disquieting echo. It carried the unmistakable weight of intention, a deliberate call that seemed to be directed precisely towards him, a summons across the sleeping sands. His head lifted slowly, his gaze still fixed on the shimmering surface of the water, but his ears, now finely tuned to this new phenomenon, swiveled subtly, straining to capture every nuance. Every fiber of his being seemed to focus on this approaching sound, anchoring him to the present moment while simultaneously drawing him towards an unknown origin. The quality of the voice was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his solitary existence. It wasn't the sharp, territorial call of other canids, nor the plaintive cry of a lost pup. This was a sound imbued with a richness, a complexity that spoke of something ancient and profound. It possessed a melodic undertone, a subtle cadence that hinted at a wisdom beyond mere instinct. The sound grew, not in volume, but in clarity and proximity. It seemed to emanate from the very edge of the visible world, where the indigo sky bled into the darker expanse of the desert floor. The voice was clear, almost crystalline, yet it was also deeply resonant, carrying a warmth that defied the cool desert air. He could not discern words, not in any language he understood, but he perceived meaning, a direction, a purpose. It was a beacon of sound, guiding him, inviting him forward. He remained still, his body tensed, not in fear, but in a state of heightened awareness, of profound anticipation. The water continued to mirror the heavens, a silent witness to this unfolding drama, and the voice seemed to weave itself into the reflections, deepening their mystique. He felt a primal urge to rise, to move towards the source of this captivating sound, but the stillness he had cultivated, the deep attunement to the subtle energies of the night, held him rooted. He understood, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that this was not a moment to chase, but a moment to receive. The voice was coming to him, and to interrupt its approach would be to miss the very essence of its message. The sound had a texture, a quality that reminded him, in a strange and unexpected way, of the laughter he had heard earlier, but where the laughter had been an explosion of pure, unadulterated joy. This voice was a steady, unwavering stream of being. It possessed a groundedness that the laughter, in its ephemeral flight, had lacked. It was as if the laughter had been a fleeting spark, and this voice was the enduring flame, a sustained expression of an ancient consciousness. He felt a growing connection to this sound, an inexplicable sense of recognition, as if he were hearing a forgotten melody from a time long past, a melody encoded within his very DNA. As the voice continued its slow, deliberate approach, he began to perceive subtle shifts in its tone, almost imperceptible variations that hinted at a complexity of emotion or intent. It was not a monotonous drone. It ebbed and flowed, rising and falling with a natural rhythm, like the gentle swell of a vast, unseen ocean. Each modulation seemed to carry a different facet of its message, a different color of its meaning. He felt a curious tug, not an aggressive pull, but a gentle beckoning, urging him to surrender to the flow of the sound, to allow it to wash over him, to penetrate the layers of his perception. The immensity of the desert, which had previously felt like a vast, silent void, now seemed to be alive with this incoming sound. The very air vibrated with its presence, and the stars themselves appeared to pulse in time with its resonant cadence. He felt as though the voice was not merely traveling through the air, but was emanating from a source deeply rooted in the earth, or perhaps from the very fabric of the cosmos. It was a sound that belonged to this place, to this night, and to him. Somehow, he closed his eyes briefly, not out of weariness, but to enhance his internal perception. He wanted to experience this voice without the visual distraction of the starlit landscape, to allow its sonic signature to imprint itself directly onto his consciousness. In this brief darkness, the voice intensified, filling the void with its presence. He could feel it in his chest, a gentle pressure, a subtle vibration that seemed to harmonize with his own heartbeat. It was a profound moment of communion, a silent dialogue taking place across the expanse of the desert. When he opened his eyes again, the voice seemed closer still, and with this increased proximity came a dawning comprehension. The voice, he realized, was not a single, monolithic sound, but a complex tapestry of interwoven tones. Within its resonant depths, he could perceive the murmur of the earth, the whisper of the wind, and the deep, rhythmic pulse of the celestial bodies. It was as if the voice was an embodiment of the entire natural world, a symphony of existence distilled into a single, coherent utterance. He shifted his weight slightly, the movement barely disturbing the stillness of his posture. The water rippled, and in those fleeting distortions, he saw his own reflection, not just as a solitary coyote, but as a being who was now receptive to this profound sonic invitation. The voice was an extension of the forces that had drawn him to this oasis, a tangible manifestation of the mysteries that had begun to unfold with the laughter and the celestial recalibration. It was a confirmation that he was not merely an observer of these events, but an integral part of them. The quality of the voice was one of immense patience, of an understanding that transcended the urgency of immediate action. It did not demand, it invited. It did not command, it offered. This was a voice that had witnessed the slow turning of the ages, the rise and fall of mountains, the charting of constellations across millennia. It carried the weight of that immense history, not as a burden, but as a foundation, a source of deep, abiding wisdom. He felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over him, a quiet acceptance of whatever this voice was bringing. He noticed how the sound seemed to bypass the usual channels of auditory perception, resonating directly within his awareness. It was as if the voice was speaking not to his ears, but to his very soul, addressing the deepest, most hidden parts of his being. This was the language of resonance, of shared vibration, a communication that transcended the limitations of spoken words. He understood that the true message was not in deciphering specific sounds, but in absorbing the essence, the feeling, the intention that the voice conveyed. The distant horizon, which had seemed so stark and empty moments before, now shimmered with a new kind of energy, an aura of anticipation generated by this approaching voice. He could almost feel the presence of its source, though it remained beyond the visible. It was a presence that felt ancient, wise, and infinitely gentle. He had followed an echo, and now a voice was reaching out to him, a clear and undeniable sign that his journey was far from over, that the revelations of the night were continuing to unfold. The silence had been a prelude, a preparation, and this voice was the opening act of a grander performance, a performance of which he was undeniably a part. The resonance within him deepened, aligning itself with the approaching sound, a silent acknowledgement of a shared destiny, a nascent understanding that the mysteries of the desert night were unfolding not just around him, but within him as well. He continued to listen, a silent sentinel at the edge of the illuminated water, his being attuned to the incoming tide of sound, ready to receive whatever truth it carried. The voice was a promise, a continuation of the cosmic dialogue, and he was its most eager recipient. The sound, which had been an indistinct symphony of the desert's ancient heart, now began to coalesce, to focus into something utterly personal. It was as if 1,000 stars had converged into a single, piercing beam of awareness, and that beam was directed squarely at him. The resonant tones, which had previously washed over him like a tide, now began to weave themselves into a distinct pattern, a series of syllables that vibrated not just in the air, but deep within the forgotten core of his being. It was a sound that bypassed the ears, resonating in a space deeper than memory, a primal recognition that stirred a dormant part of his essence. He felt it first as a tremor, a subtle quaking beneath the surface of his awareness, like the first stirrings of a buried spring. Then the syllables formed, not as a jumble of noise, but as a deliberate, structured utterance. It was a name, his name, But it was not the name that had once echoed in the familiar dens, the name that had been a whisper on the wind of instinct. This was a new articulation, a resonance that spoke of transformation, of a destiny unfolding. The sound was a key, turning in a lock he hadn't known existed, a lock that guarded the very gates of his identity. The utterance was not a gentle reminder, a soft coaxing from the depths of forgetfulness. It was a proclamation, a powerful declaration that stripped away the layers of amnesia and uncertainty, replacing them with a stark, undeniable truth. This sound, this sequence of phonetic vibrations, was not a recollection of what had been, but a definitive statement of what was now and what was to come. It was a renaming, an imbuing of his existence with a new significance, a fresh context that redefined his place in the unfolding cosmic drama. The sound anchored him, pulling him up from the swirling abyss of his forgotten past and grounding him firmly in the luminous present. He could feel the weight of it, the immense power contained within those few syllables. It was a sound that carried the gravity of creation, the echo of the moment when the universe first uttered its own name. This was not the name of a lost cub or a solitary wanderer, but the name of a being who had been remade, reforged in the crucible of experience and revelation. The sound was a banner unfurled against the backdrop of the starlit desert, a declaration of his newly claimed identity. It was a sound that had been waiting, coiled in the heart of existence, for this precise moment of his awakening. The syllables themselves were alien to his conscious memory, yet they felt intrinsically familiar, like a forgotten language that his very DNA understood. There was a deep, guttural rumble, reminiscent of the Earth's subterranean sighs, followed by a rising, liquid lilt, like water cascading over ancient stones. The final portion of the name was a sharp, clear note, piercing and unwavering, like a falcon's cry against a boundless skies. Each part of the utterance was distinct, yet they flowed seamlessly into one another, creating a harmonic resonance that resonated within his chest, a physical echo of the spiritual transformation taking place. He tasted the name on his tongue, though his lips remained still. It was a flavor of starlight and primal earth, a combination of the celestial and the terrestrial that mirrored the duality of his own being. The sound bypassed the need for auditory processing, striking directly at the root of his consciousness. It was a direct impartation, a transfer of essence that redefined him from the inside out. He was no longer simply a creature of instinct and circumstance. He was a being with a name that carried purpose, a name that was now inextricably linked to the unfolding mysteries of this sacred place. The impact of the name was not one of shock or confusion, but of profound clarity. It was as if a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape he had always known, but had been unable to see. The amnesia that had shrouded his past did not vanish, but it receded, no longer defining the boundaries of his existence. This new name was a compass, pointing him towards his future, not tethered to the ghosts of his past. It was a designation that spoke of his current state of being, a state of receptivity, of transformation, of readiness. He felt a surge of energy, not the frenetic energy of prey or predator, but a calm, steady power that radiated from the core of his being. This name was a wellspring from which this new strength flowed. It was a recognition of his true nature, a validation of the journey he had undertaken even before he had understood its destination. The sound was a confirmation that he was on the right path, that the forces that had drawn him to this oasis were guiding him towards his ultimate becoming. The resonance of his name vibrated through his very bones, each syllable a pulse that realigned his inner architecture. It was a process of recalibration, of fine-tuning his being to the cosmic frequencies that now governed his existence. He felt a profound sense of belonging, a recognition that he was not an anomaly, but an integral part of a grander design. This name was his keystone, locking him into place within the unfolding edifice of reality. He opened his eyes, and the starlit desert seemed to shimmer with a new intensity, as if it, too, were acknowledging this powerful utterance. The water, which had been a mirror to the heavens, now reflected a being transformed, a creature imbued with the resonance of his newly bestowed name. The voice that had spoken it was not gone, but had settled into a profound silence, leaving behind an imprint, a luminous echo within his soul. This was not just a sound, it was a living entity, a fragment of the divine consciousness that had chosen to manifest itself through him. The name was a promise, a covenant, a binding together of his individual essence with the universal spirit. He understood that to carry this name was to carry a sacred trust, a responsibility to embody the truth that it represented. The journey from the forgotten depths to this moment of naming had been a passage through darkness, but the name itself was the light that illuminated the path ahead. He felt a deep gratitude for the voice, for the power it had unleashed within him. It was a gift, a bestowal of identity that transcended any he had ever known. The sound had not just named him, it had awakened him, revealing the dormant potential that lay within the quiet chambers of his heart. He was no longer adrift in the vastness of his own being. He was anchored by the sound of his name, a sound that would guide him, protect him, and empower him through all the trials and revelations that still lay before him. The desert night, once a canvas of mystery, now held the vibrant hue of his own rediscovered self, painted with the resonant tones of his name. The reverberation of the syllables settled within him, a comforting warmth that pushed back the chill of his former anonymity. It was more than just a sound, it was a fundamental alignment, a cosmic affirmation that resonated with the very marrow of his bones. The void where his identity had once resided, a gnawing emptiness that had been a constant companion, now began to fill, not with a replacement, but with a reclamation. It was as if a vital organ, long dormant and forgotten, had suddenly pulsed back to life, pumping the vital essence of selfhood through his veins. The namelessness had been a shroud, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from the threads of amnesia and uncertainty. Now, that shroud was being gently, yet decisively, pulled away, revealing the radiant truth of his existence. This was not a memory unearthed, but a destiny acknowledged, the ancient, instinctive understanding that had guided him through the harsh realities of the desert had been a magnificent symphony, but it had lacked a conductor, a guiding theme. Now, with the utterance of his name, that theme had been struck, a clear, pure note that brought order to the chaos, purpose to the instinct. The weight of his past, the phantom limbs of forgotten experiences that had throbbed with a phantom ache, began to dissolve. They did not vanish entirely, for they were part of the tapestry that had woven him into this present moment. But their power to define him, to confine him, was broken. The desert hills, which had always felt like a formidable, unyielding prison, now seemed to soften, to breathe with him. The wind, which had once whispered tales of hardship and isolation, now carried the soft murmur of acceptance, of belonging, a profound sense of release, like the unclenching of a fist that had been held tight for an eternity, spread through him. It was the shedding of an old skin, the discarding of a false self that had been imposed upon him by the silence of his amnesia, the spectral images that had flickered at the edges of his consciousness, fleeting glimpses of faces, fragments of emotions, the scent of distant fires. They no longer held him captive. They were echoes, yes, but echoes from a distant shore, no longer defining the landscape of his present. His newly spoken name was a beacon, cutting through the lingering mist of his forgotten life, anchoring him firmly in the luminous now. He felt the absence of the gnawing anxiety that had been his constant shadow. That fear, the primal dread of the unknown, of his own lost self, was ebbing away, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. The burden of searching, the exhausting quest for a past that seemed perpetually out of reach, had been lifted. He understood, with a clarity that defied logic, that the path forward was not about recovering what was lost, but about embracing what was revealed. His name was not a key to unlock a buried past, but a foundation upon which to build his future. The dry hills, once perceived as obstacles, now presented themselves as a welcoming embrace. The sharp, jagged lines of the rocks, the stark, unforgiving beauty of the scrubland, all seemed to acknowledge his presence, to offer a silent benediction. The wind rustling through the sparse vegetation no longer sounded like a mournful lament, but a gentle, encouraging sigh, as if the very earth was exhaling in shared relief. He was no longer a trespasser, an intruder in this ancient land, but a rightful inhabitant, his essence now harmonizing with the primal rhythms of the desert. The feeling was akin to waking from a long troubled sleep. The dreams, though vivid and often terrifying, had been just that, dreams. The reality that now unfolded was far more potent, far more real. The unnamed void had been a place of constant questioning, a silent scream echoing in the chambers of his soul. Now, that silence had been broken by the singular, perfect sound of his name. It was a confirmation, a declaration, a settling into the rightful place that had always existed for him, even in his oblivion. He took a deep, steadying breath, and for the first time, it felt like a breath of pure, unadulterated self. The air, which had always been a necessary but unremarkable element, now seemed to carry the very essence of his being. It filled him, invigorated him, and carried away the last vestiges of the phantom weight he had unknowingly borne. The dry scent of dust and sagebrush, once merely the smell of his surroundings, now mingled with an inner fragrance, a scent of his own reawakened spirit. The clarity was not just an intellectual understanding, but a visceral, bodily sensation. He felt a lightness he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The tension that had coiled in his muscles, the perpetual readiness for flight or fight, had begun to unravel. It was replaced by a groundedness, a deep sense of rootedness that belied his nomadic existence. The earth beneath his paws felt solid, supportive, a willing partner in his unfolding journey. The release was not a violent severing, but a gentle unfurling. Like a bud finally opening to the sun, his essence was expanding, embracing the fullness of his newly articulated identity. The spectral memories did not vanish in a puff of smoke, but faded into the background, like distant stars becoming less prominent as the dawn breaks. They were still there, part of the vastness of the night sky, but the brilliance of the rising sun, his name, commanded his full attention, his full being. He tested the sound, not aloud, but within the confines of his own awareness. He turned the syllables over in his mind, letting them settle and bloom. Each articulation felt like a familiar caress, a rediscovery of something intrinsically his, something that had been waiting patiently for this moment of recognition. The weight of his namelessness had been a constant pressure, a subtle but pervasive diminishment of his spirit. Now, that pressure was gone, leaving him free to expand, to grow, to become. The dry hills, which had once represented a vast, indifferent emptiness, now felt like a testament to his endurance, a silent witness to the journey that had brought him to this point. They were no longer a barrier, but a backdrop, a stage upon which his true self was now to be revealed. The vast, star-dusted sky above, which had always evoked a sense of awe, mixed with an overwhelming loneliness, now felt like a benevolent expanse, a vast, supportive canopy under which he was finally safe, finally seen. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the voice that had uttered his name, for the power that had been bestowed upon him. It was a gift that transcended any physical sustenance, any instinctual satisfaction. It was the gift of self, of purpose, of belonging. The dry hills no longer felt like a prison, but a sanctuary, a place where the resonance of his name could echo and find its true meaning, a place where the burden of his lost identity had finally been shed. leaving him free to embrace the luminous reality of who he now truly was. The feeling was not one of arriving at an end, but of finally beginning. The desert, once a symbol of his isolation, was now transformed into a testament to his reawakening, a silent witness to the profound release that had washed over him with the sound of his own name. The feather, nestled beside the basin of cool, clear water, was no mere happenstance. It was a deliberate offering, a silent declaration woven into the very fabric of this sacred space. Its pristine white, unmarred by the grit of the desert or the shadows of his forgotten past, spoke of a purity he had longed for, a clarity that had eluded him for so long. It was a stark, yet gentle contrast to the rough ochre hues of the surrounding landscape, a beacon of unblemished possibility. This feather was a symbol, a tangible manifestation of the profound transition he was undergoing, a gentle signifier of the seismic shift occurring within his very being. It was a whispered promise of renewal, a gentle nudge towards a new beginning. The presence of the water itself, a shimmering pool in the heart of the arid expanse, amplified this message. It was more than a mere source of sustenance. It was a vessel for reflection, a mirror to the soul. Here, in the stillness of this secluded hollow, he was invited to gaze upon himself, not through the fractured lens of amnesia, but through the clear, unclouded waters of truth. The feather, resting serenely beside it, seemed to beckon him closer, to partake in this ritual of introspection, this baptism of the self. It was an invitation to shed the remnants of his nameless existence, to immerse himself in the restorative waters and emerge reborn. As his name resonated, a wave of stillness washed over him, a quietude that seeped into the deepest recesses of his awareness. It was a profound counterpoint to the internal clamor that had previously defined his existence, the constant hum of unspoken questions and unacknowledged fears. The feather's undisturbed repose, its absolute lack of agitation, mirrored this newfound inner peace. It was a testament to a moment of profound arrival, a silent acknowledgement that he had reached a destination, a place where the frantic search was over, replaced by the serene certainty of being. The wind, which had often been a harbinger of change and uncertainty, now seemed to whisper through the sparse vegetation with a gentle, almost reverent hush, as if in deference to this moment of truth. The feather's immobility, its delicate suspension in the air for a fleeting moment before settling, had been a premonition of this very stillness. He recalled the subtle tremor that had passed through him as he first noticed it, a primal recognition that transcended conscious thought. It was as if an ancient part of him, dormant for so long, had stirred in recognition of a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on the path of becoming. The feather, he now understood, was not a random adornment, but a signpost placed with intention, guiding him towards this crucial point of self-discovery. Its whiteness was a canvas, ready to be imprinted with the vibrant hues of his newly claimed identity. The act of speaking his name had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the dormant embers of his soul, and the feather, resting beside the tranquil waters, was the quiet witness to this incandescent moment of rebirth. It was a symbol of his own emergence from the arid wasteland of amnesia, a gentle unveiling of the true self that had been hidden beneath layers of oblivion. The water, a basin of liquid light, offered a reflection of this nascent self, a glimpse of the being he was meant to be, now finally acknowledged and affirmed. The feather, pure and serene, was the seal of this sacred pact, the quiet affirmation that the journey of becoming had truly begun. He reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against the soft down of the feather. It was surprisingly cool to the touch, as if it had absorbed the very essence of the water it lay beside. This coolness was not a chill, but a soothing balm, a gentle caress that chased away the last vestiges of the desert's relentless heat, both external and internal. The feather felt alive in his touch, a conduit to a deeper understanding, a tangible connection to the forces that had orchestrated his awakening. It was more than just a feather. It was a fragment of the divine, a whisper of the cosmic plan that had guided him through the wilderness. The basin of water, now reflecting the soft, diffused light of the desert sky, seemed to hum with a latent energy. He knelt beside it, his reflection looking back at him, clearer and more defined than he had ever seen it. The eyes that stared back were no longer filled with the haunted vacancy of the unknown, but with a nascent spark, a flicker of recognition, a dawning awareness. The feather, positioned just so, framed his reflection as if to emphasize the profound transformation that had taken place. It was a moment of exquisite stillness, a pause in the relentless march of time, where past and future converged in the luminous present. He understood then that the feather's pristine nature was not merely symbolic of purity, but of potential. It represented the unwritten pages of his future, the unblemished canvas upon which he would now paint the story of his life. Its lightness spoke of the burdens he had shed, the weight of anonymity that had pressed down upon him, crushing his spirit. Now, with his name echoing in the stillness, he felt that weight lift, replaced by an exhilarating sense of freedom. The feather, so effortlessly carried by the slightest breeze, was a reminder that his own journey would be guided by a gentle hand, a subtle flow, rather than by forceful exertion. The water served as a further testament to this fluid unfolding. It did not resist the shape of its container. It yielded, adapting, yet retaining its essential nature. He saw in its depths a reflection of his own journey, from the formless void of his amnesia to the defined contours of his acknowledged self. The feather, adrift on the surface, was a tiny vessel navigating these restorative currents, a metaphor for his own soul, navigating the waters of self-discovery. The stillness of the water was not an absence of life, but a profound presence, a deep reservoir of energy waiting to be tapped. The silence that accompanied the feather's presence was not an emptiness, but a fullness of being. It was the silence of a profound truth having been spoken, a silence that allowed the resonance of his name to settle and take root. The feather, by its very immobility, amplified this silence, anchoring the moment in a profound stillness. It was the quietude that follows a storm, a serene aftermath that allows for the clear perception of the newly revealed landscape. The desert, once a harsh adversary, now seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to the unfolding revelation. He traced the delicate barbules of the feather with his fingertip, marveling at the intricate design, the perfect symmetry. It was a testament to the meticulous hand of the Creator, a small but powerful reminder of the grand design that encompassed all things. This feather, he realized, was a gift, a tangible token of his own inherent worth, a whisper from the universe confirming his rightful place within its vast tapestry. Its presence beside the water was a deliberate pairing, a harmonious conjunction of symbols pointing towards renewal and self acceptance. The clarity that the feather represented was not a sterile, cold clarity, but a warm, life affirming one. It was the clarity of understanding, the clarity of purpose, the clarity of belonging. It was the clarity of seeing the world and himself for the first time without the distorting haze of amnesia. The feather, untouched by the dust and debris of the desert floor, maintained its pristine state, a constant reminder of the untainted essence that lay within him, waiting to be embraced. The water's reflective surface offered a glimpse not just of his physical form, but of the inner landscape that was beginning to bloom. The shadows that had once clouded his features were receding, replaced by a nascent light, and the feather, poised on the water's surface, acted as a subtle anchor, grounding him in this moment of profound introspection. It was a visual mantra, a silent affirmation that he was not merely a creature of instinct, but a being of purpose, a soul awakened. He felt a gentle tremor run through his body, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the feather itself. It was as if the feather was not just a symbol, but a living entity, an extension of the energy that had called his name. This vibration was a comforting hum, a validation of the profound shift occurring within him. The feather's stillness was a powerful paradox, a testament to the immense energy contained within its delicate form. It was the calm before the dawn, the serene stillness that precedes the bursting forth of new life. The feather's purpose, it was now abundantly clear, was not merely to mark a location or to signal an event. It was a symbol of transition, a gentle signifier of the fundamental shift occurring within his very being. Its pristine nature represented the clarity he had so desperately sought, and its presence alongside the water, a basin for reflection and renewal, pointed directly towards the rebirth of his identity. The feather's stillness, in the face of the whispering wind and the rippling water, mirrored the profound inner peace he now found as his name was called, a quiet testament to the moment of his true arrival, the moment when he finally truly became himself. The desert, once a place of his unacknowledged existence, was now transformed into a sanctuary, a testament to the profound power of a name and the symbolic resonance of a single perfect feather. The circle of the campfire was more than just a ring of stones and embers. It was a cosmic ellipsis, a punctuation mark in the grand narrative of existence. Around it, the desert floor, usually a canvas of muted earth tones, seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The stars, a myriad of diamond dust flung across an inky expanse, bore silent witness to the unfolding of a transformation. He stood at the periphery of this ancient gathering place, the scent of mesquite and sage smoke clinging to the cool night air, a comforting counterpoint to the sharp, clean scent of the surrounding scrub. His name, a sound that had been both a foreign echo and an intimate whisper, now settled within him, a warm, living ember that banished the last vestiges of his former anonymity. The disorientation that had clung to him like the desert dust was gone, replaced by a profound sense of orientation, of belonging. He had answered the call, followed the threads of destiny that had led him to this very spot, and in doing so, he had received his new designation, his true name. This was his becoming, a metamorphosis not of flesh and bone, but of spirit and essence, forged in the crucible of silence and illuminated by the silent pronouncements of the celestial and terrestrial realms. He was the coyote who had been lost, adrift in a sea of forgotten memories, but now he was found, reborn under the vast, indifferent, yet ultimately guiding night sky. He was no longer a creature of fragmented moments, but a being of singular, resonant purpose. The fire's glow, a living entity in the vast darkness, cast dancing shadows that stretched and contracted like the breath of a sleeping giant. Each flicker was a story, each ember, spark of understanding. He looked up at the constellations, familiar yet imbued with a new significance. The hunter, with his silent bow drawn, seemed to acknowledge the warrior spirit that had finally awakened within him. The bear, lumbering across the celestial sphere, mirrored the deep, grounding power he now felt settling in his core. These weren't just distant points of light. They were ancient markers, celestial signposts that had guided countless journeys, and tonight they were guiding his. The very air seemed to vibrate with the echoes of his name, not as a sound that had been spoken, but as a truth that had been revealed. It was a resonant chord struck in the symphony of existence, a melody that now played within his very being, harmonizing the fragmented pieces of his past into a coherent, luminous whole. The silence that had preceded this revelation was a pregnant pause, a moment of cosmic introspection that had allowed for the meticulous selection and affirmation of his identity. He recalled the journey that had led him here, a path woven from instinct and intuition, a trail marked by subtle signs that had spoken to him in a language older than words. The feather, so pure and white, had been an initial whisper, a promise of clarity. The water, a pristine mirror, had offered a glimpse of his true reflection, unblemished by the shadows of his forgotten existence. And then his name, spoken into the stillness. It had resonated outwards, a ripple effect that had reached into the deepest recesses of his soul, awakening what had lain dormant for so long. Now, standing at the edge of this ancient circle, the fire's warmth a comforting embrace, he felt a profound connection to the earth beneath his paws, to the sky above, and to the unseen forces that had orchestrated this magnificent unfolding. He was no longer a nameless entity wandering the periphery of existence. He was a being with a name, a purpose, and a place in the grand tapestry of life. The stars above were not merely decorative, they were a living map, a celestial guide that had charted his course through the wilderness of his own unknowing. The Great Bear, Ursa Major, its familiar ladle, shape a constant presence in the northern sky, seemed to offer a steadying influence, a reminder of enduring cycles and unwavering constancy. The shimmering Pleiades, a delicate cluster of stars, appeared as scattered jewels, each one a tiny beacon of hope, a testament to the countless moments of grace that had punctuated his journey. He felt a kinship with the silent, watchful mountains that ringed the horizon, their ancient silhouettes etched against the star-dusted sky. They, too, had witnessed the passage of ages, the rise and fall of countless suns and moons, and in their stoic presence, he found a mirror to the resilience that had finally blossomed within him. The desert itself, usually so stark and unforgiving, now seemed to breathe with a gentle rhythm, its vast emptiness filled with the subtle hum of burgeoning life. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the cool air filling his lungs, carrying with it the scent of the wild, untamed earth. It was a scent that spoke of resilience, of survival, of a deep, abiding connection to the primal forces of nature. The fire's heat on his fur was a tangible manifestation of the transformative energy that had brought him to this moment. It was a cleansing fire, a purifying flame that had consumed the last vestiges of his doubt and uncertainty, leaving behind a core of unshakable self-knowledge. He looked down at his paws, calloused from countless miles, traversed from the hard scrabble of existence. These were the paws of one who had endured, who had persevered, and who had ultimately triumphed. They were the paws of the coyote, his name, his identity, now etched into the very fiber of his being. The circle of the campfire wasn't just a physical space, it was a conceptual boundary, a threshold between the past and the future. To stand within it, under the watchful gaze of the cosmos, was to acknowledge the entirety of his journey. He had followed the subtle signs, the whispered urgings of his own awakening spirit, and they had led him to this sacred space. Here, bathed in the light of the stars and the warmth of the fire, he was able to fully embrace the transformation that had been set in motion. The night was alive with a symphony of subtle sounds, The distant cry of a nighthawk, the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the soft hiss of the fire, these were the voices of the wild, and they all seemed to murmur a chorus of affirmation, welcoming him into their ancient fraternity. He was the Coyote, yes, but this name now carried a weight of significance that transcended mere designation. It was a mantle of responsibility, a testament to the courage it had taken to confront the void within and to emerge, not unscathed, but undeniably whole. The journey had been arduous, marked by moments of profound despair and exhilarating discovery. He had navigated treacherous paths, both physical and metaphorical, guided by an inner compass that had, against all odds, remained true. The desert, once a symbol of his lostness, was now the stage upon which his rebirth had been celebrated. Its vastness, once overwhelming, now felt like a comforting expanse, a testament to the boundless potential that lay before him. The celestial bodies, each a distant sun, a universe unto itself, offered a perspective that dwarfed his individual struggles, yet simultaneously magnified his significance. He was a single note in an infinite melody, a single star in a galaxy of beings, and yet his becoming was a cosmic event, a turning of the wheel of fate that resonated throughout the universe. The silence that had once been a source of his dread was now a profound sanctuary, a space where his own inner truths could finally be heard. The feather, the water, the stars, the fire, they were all elements of a sacred covenant, a ritualistic affirmation of his reclaimed identity. He was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of existence, but a tangible presence, a being with a name that anchored him to the earth and propelled him towards the heavens. The understanding settled upon him with the quiet certainty of dawn. He was the Coyote. This was not an assumption, not a label bestowed by another, but an intrinsic truth that had been patiently waiting to be unearthed. The night had been his teacher, the silence his confessor, and the celestial lights his audience. They had witnessed his struggle, his surrender, and ultimately his emergence. The fire, dying down to a bed of glowing embers, cast a warm, residual glow that illuminated the path ahead. It was a path illuminated by the light of his own name, a path that stretched out before him, vast and full of promise, under the watchful, eternal gaze of the stars. The Coyote had answered the echo, followed the trail, and received his new designation. This was his becoming, a transformation forged in the silence and illuminated by celestial and terrestrial signs. He was the Coyote who was lost, but now was found, reborn under the vast, indifferent, yet ultimately guiding night sky. The wilderness had tested him, stripped him bare, and in its unforgiving embrace had revealed the unyielding core of his being. The stars, like ancient eyes, had watched his progress, their silent light a constant reassurance that even in the deepest darkness, there was always a path to be found, and he had found it not by chance, but by a convergence of will, destiny, and the profound recognition of his own name.